deep and quiet places between the galaxies, there is an emptiness that defies words. Imagine a blackness so complete, it has never known light. A silence so profound, it has never heard a sound. This is the intergalactic void. It is the true sea of infinity, stretching for millions of light years, an ocean of serene, unending night. Here, the great island chains of stars and nebulae, the galaxies we know, are just lonely points of light, trembling in the distance. Their warmth and their clamor cannot reach this far. This is a realm of perfect cold and perfect peace, a place where nothing ever happens, or so it was thought. For an age beyond counting, this eternal calm held true. The void was a chasm of serene emptiness, a barrier of sheer distance that kept the scattered families of stars apart. It is a space so vast that to cross it, you would need to travel for millions of years at the speed of light. The matter that exists out here is thin beyond comprehension. Scientists believe there is perhaps only one single atom for every cubic meter of space. It is the closest thing in all of creation to a perfect and absolute nothing. This profound emptiness served as a wall, a final frontier separating one galaxy story from the next. From the perspective of our own Milky Way, this great void was a comfort. It was a guarantee of isolation. Humanity, in its 41st millennium, had troubles enough. Its own galaxy was a cauldron of war, a tapestry of dying empires and rising horrors. But the horrors were known. They were familiar. The greenskin, the Eldari, the ancient Necrons. They were part of a story that had been unfolding for millennia. The terrors were from Sid within, the galaxy. The idea of a threat coming from outside, from across that impossible silent ocean, was not something the Imperium of man had ever truly considered. It was a strategic impossibility, a fear too large to even contemplate. Far away, across the void, other galaxies turned in the darkness, each one a self-contained universe of stories. Consider one such galaxy, catalogued by ancient human astronomers as NGC 4631 and nicknamed the Whale Galaxy, located 30 million light-years away. It is similar in size to our own Milky Way. From our vantage point, we see it edge on a beautiful distorted wedge of light that gives it the appearance of some great cosmic leviathan swimming through the void. It even has a small companion galaxy, a dwarf elliptical known as NGC 4627, that travels with it, like a calf following its mother. For eons, the Whale Galaxy was a place of spectacular violence and creation. It was a starburst galaxy, meaning it was forming new stars at a furious rate. Countless suns were being born in its spiraling arms, shining with brilliant blue light before dying in cataclysmic supernova explosions. These explosions were so numerous, so powerful, that they created a superwind, a gale of superheated gas blowing out from the galaxy S-plane, creating a vast, shimmering corona of X, ray light visible across the cosmos. It was a beacon of vibrant, chaotic life. But then, something began to change, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The light from the Whale Galaxy began to dull. The brilliant flashes of supernovae became less frequent. The great superwind seemed to calm, the halo of hot gas thinning, as if the fuel for its stellar furnaces was running low. To any outside observer with the technology to watch, it would have been a subtle astronomical curiosity, a distant galaxy entering a new phase of its life. But it was not a natural change. It was a symptom. The galaxy was not just calming down, it was being consumed. The process was slow, methodical, and utterly silent. It did not arrive with the clamor of war or the flash of an explosion. It arrived as a shadow, a creeping stain spreading through the star systems at the galaxy S-edge. The advance was patient, moving from one world to the next, leaving behind nothing but cold, lifeless rock. It was a form of death on a scale previously unimagined. Life in all its forms was simply erased. Every living thing, every plant, every animal, every microbe in the soil and in the seas, was devoured. Every atmosphere was stripped away. Every ocean was drained. This was not conquest. This was harvesting. This was the approach of the Hive Mind. This was the beginning of the Tyranids. They traveled not as a fleet of constructed ships, but as a living organism of incomprehensible scale. A swarm of biological vessels moving through the intergalactic void in a state of near hibernation, conserving energy for the long journey. Their origin was, and remains, a mystery. They came from a galaxy that was already dead, a universe that had been picked clean. Now, they drifted from one galaxy to the next, a cosmic plague driven by a singular, unthinking purpose: to consume, to adapt, and to grow. Before the shadow fell upon a new star system, there would be a stillness, a strange quiet that settled over the worlds within. Animals would grow restless. Those with even a flicker of psychic sensitivity would be plagued by nightmares of an immense crushing hunger. Then the vanguard organisms would arrive, smaller, stealthier bioforms designed to infiltrate and observe. Creatures like the lictor, chameleonic hunters that could move unseen through the densest jungles and the most crowded cities, studying the planet, its defenses, and identifying its dominant life forms. They were the eyes of the swarm. These vanguard organisms did not communicate in any way that could be intercepted. Their thoughts were not their own. They were whispers from the immense, gestalt consciousness of the hive mind, connected across impossible distances. They gathered biological information, cataloguing the genetic diversity of the world, assessing its biomass. The hive mind learned, it processed, and then it adapted. When the main swarm finally arrived, it was perfectly engineered to overcome that specific world's defenses. If the planet was a fortress world, protected by powerful shields and orbital defenses, the hive fleet would birth massive creatures with dense, armored carapaces and organic cannons capable of spitting corrosive acids that could dissolve even the strongest alloys. If the world was a lush death world, teeming with ferocious predators, the swarm would unleash bioforms that were even faster, stronger, and more savage. Every defense was met with a perfectly tailored biological counter. And it all happened in a terrifying silence. There were no war cries, no shouted commands, only the chittering of claws, the tearing of flesh, and the wet, slithering sound of biomass being absorbed into reclamation pools. The planets were not just conquered, they were broken down to their constituent organic molecules and repurposed. After consuming the Whale Galaxy and countless others before it, the hive mind drifted on, back into the vast, silent void. It moved now towards a new beacon of light, a new promise of sustenance. In the 41st millennium, the psychic light of the Emperor of Mankind, Astronomicon, shone like a lighthouse across the galaxy, a beacon of hope for lost human ships. But to the thing that slumbered in the void, it was not a sign of hope, it was the scent of a feast. Drawn by this psychic flare, the leading tendrils of the first great hive fleet began their final silent approach towards the Milky Way. Its name, given to it by the first humans who would encounter its horror, would be Behemoth, and its arrival would mark the beginning of a new age of fear for a galaxy that thought it had already seen the worst horrors the universe had to offer. The vast, silent void had ceased to be a barrier. It had become a highway, and something truly alien was about to arrive. Before the name, Tyranid, was ever uttered by human lips, before the shadow fell upon the eastern fringe, there was only the quiet. For uncounted millennia, the vast, silent darkness between galaxies was a subject of academic curiosity for the Imperium of Man, but little more. It was a sterile, unending emptiness, a final frontier that held no resources, no enemies, and no conceivable purpose. The distances were simply too great, the journey too perilous to warrant serious exploration. Even the most daring rogue traders, men and women who viewed the galactic rim as a mere starting line for their ambitions, rarely ventured into that profound, starless black. Why would they? The galaxy itself, with its 400 billion stars, was a canvas of near infinite discovery, danger, and profit. The intergalactic void was, for all intents and purposes, a wall, a final, absolute end. And yet, whispers began. They were not loud. They were not even words. They were discrepancies, anomalies in the grand silent data, streams that flowed from the Imperium's most distant eyes and ears. On isolated watch stations, orbiting lonely stars at the very edge of the segmentum pacificus, astromancers and data, scriveners started to notice something wrong with the nothingness. For centuries, their arcane instruments and cogitator arrays had painted a consistent picture of the void beyond the galaxy. It was a near, perfect static, a gentle hiss of background radiation left over from the birth of creation itself. But now, in a vast swathe of the intergalactic medium, the static was quieter, too quiet. This phenomenon was first logged as the silentium by a lonely astropathic relay station, designated Echo -77. The station's charter was to listen for the faint psychic echoes of lost expeditionary fleets, or the death screams of forgotten colonies. But for a solid decade, a growing patch of the void had yielded nothing. Not even the usual cosmic chatter. It was a region of space, so profoundly empty and silent that it seemed to absorb all energy, all light, all thought that touched it. It was a hole in the universe. In the parlance of ancient Terran astronomers, it would have been called a supervoid, a vast cosmic desert between the filaments of galactic clusters. The Imperium's logicians, however, found the sheer scale of it unsettling. It was larger than any known natural void, a sphere of emptiness, hundreds of millions of light, years across, a gaping wound in the fabric of reality. Deep within the hallowed halls of the Adeptus Mechanicus on Mars, telemetry data from Echo -77 and a dozen other listening posts was collated. Magos Biologis, their augmetic eyes glowing with cold, analytical light, noted that this great nothing, as some were calling it, was not just empty of matter and energy. It was also cold, abnormally so. Readings of the cosmic microwave background radiation, the faint afterglow of creation, showed a significant temperature drop in that specific direction. A CMB cold spot, an area colder than it had any right to be. Standard cosmological models could not fully account for it. The void was simply too vast, too empty. It defied the established patterns of the universe, but in an empire of 1,000,000 worlds, beset by heresy from within and Xenos from without, a patch of cold, quiet space was a low priority. The data was filed, archived, and largely forgotten by all but a few curious savants. The next whispers came from those who sailed the fringes. Rogue traders, ever pushing the boundaries of imperial space, began to report strange encounters near the silentium. Edge, the warrant of trade, granted these captains immense freedom, allowing them to journey into the unknown, far from the light of the Astronomicon, and on the borders of this great emptiness, they found things that did not belong. The log of the Iron Duke, a vessel belonging to the renowned Cassini dynasty, spoke of discovering a chain of dead worlds. These were not planets scoured by war or exterminators. Their atmospheres were intact, their oceans placid, but they were utterly devoid of life. No bacteria in the soil, no algae in the seas, no microbes on the wind. Every single scrap of organic material had been stripped away, leaving nothing but sterile rock and dust. Imperial explorators had noted such worlds over the preceding years, but dismissed them as isolated, natural tragedies. The crew of the Iron Duke, however, found a dozen of them, all in a line, leading directly toward the silent void. Another rogue trader, the flamboyant and reckless Captain Hester, of the vessel Starkisser, reported a fleeting encounter on his ship's long-range Auspex scanners. For less than a minute, his sensors detected a massive object moving at light speed through the void, far from any star system. It was immense, far larger than his own cruiser, but it gave off no heat, no energy readings, no engine signature. It was like a ghost, a shadow moving through the darkness. Before he could get a lock, it simply vanished. Hester's report was dismissed by the administratum as a sensor ghost, a common anomaly in the unstable regions of the galactic fringe. Hester himself, ever the pragmatist, logged it as a potential route for smugglers and moved on, unaware of the true nature of what he had witnessed. These incidents were isolated, separated by decades and thousands of light years. They were whispers in a hurricane of galactic news. Minor Xenos incursions, pirate raids, nascent rebellions. They did not form a coherent picture. Not yet. The most disturbing reports, however, were buried deepest of all, locked away in the sealed archives of the Ordo Xenos. For centuries, the Inquisition had been cataloguing strange and unique alien lifeforms. Some records, dating as far back as the 35th millennium, spoke of encounters with highly specialized predatory organisms on feral death worlds. Creatures of such lethal efficiency and bizarre biology that they seemed almost engineered. The Fenrisian Kraken, the Catachan Devil, these were thought to be apex predators, unique products of their deadly home worlds. But a few radical inquisitors began to see a terrifying pattern. These creatures, though separated by an impassable gulf of stars and time, shared subtle genetic markers. It was as if they were all distant cousins, scattered seeds of some unknown, common ancestor. Then came the first true harbingers, though they too went unrecognized for what they were. On the moons of Yimgal, miners uncovered dormant, leathery creatures that unfolded into multi-limbed horrors. These Genestealers were initially classified as a unique and dangerous Xenos species, a localized threat to be contained. Years later, on the shrine world of Gosar Quintus, an entire society was discovered to have fallen to a strange, insidious cult that worshipped alien patriarchs hidden in the darkness of their hives. The Imperium saw this as a new form of Xenos infiltration, a subversion of the imperial creed. They fought these Genestealer cults as isolated threats, never once suspecting that they were merely the vanguard. They were the patient gardeners, tilling the soil and preparing the harvest for a master that was still unimaginably distant. Each cult was a psychic beacon, a silent scream of welcome sent out into the cold and silent dark. And out in that dark, in the vast, cold emptiness of the silentium, the master was listening. The whispers from the galaxy were growing stronger, a chorus of life and energy that promised sustenance. The psychic light of the Astronomicon, the guiding star of humanity, was a brilliant, irresistible lure, shining across the void. The overload of the Pharos, beacon 10,000 years prior, had been the first dinner bell, a sudden flash of light that had drawn the Great Devourer. Tension across the abyss. Now, the steady glow of the Emperor's will was a constant, guiding path. The Hive Mind was aware. Its first tendrils, its patient vanguard organisms, had been testing the waters for millennia, slithering into the galaxy like drops of poison. They moved ahead of the fleet, identifying worlds ripe for consumption, subverting populations, and leaving trails of pheromones for the swarm to follow. The silence was not an absence. It was a presence. It was the calm before the storm. It was the shadow of a colossal, hungry entity moving slowly, inexorably, through the starless dark, drawn by the tantalizing light of a billion souls. The whispers were about to become a roar. In the quiet, lonely stretches of the galaxy, its eastern fringe, a silence was growing. A decade before the Imperium would learn the name of its new terror, reports began to trickle in from the Adeptus Mechanicus explorator teams stationed in these remote sectors. Planets that had once teemed with life, catalogued and filed away in the vast dusty archives of the Imperium, were now being rediscovered as barren rock. There was no sign of disaster, no lingering radiation from stellar flares, no evidence of orbital bombardment. There was simply nothing. Not even the hardiest bacteria could be detected in the sterile soil. These unsettling discoveries were compiled into dry factual reports and sent to the appropriate authorities, where they were filed away, lost in the endless ocean of imperial bureaucracy. The galaxy is vast, and its mysteries are many. A few dead worlds were hardly cause for alarm. On the ocean world of Tyran, nestled deep in the Ultima Segmentum, the small Adeptus Mechanicus Explorator base, Tyran Primus, continued its lonely vigil. Manned by a few hundred tech, priests and servitors, its purpose was to study the unknown sectors at the galaxy's edge. The base itself was a testament to Imperial engineering, a fortified bastion built into a chain of ancient volcanic islands, designed to withstand the planet's ferocious storms and the colossal krakens that swam in its turbulent world, spanning oceans. 4 immense defense lasers, housed in armored silos, stood ready to defend against pirates or any undiscovered leviathans that might rise from the deep. The governor of this isolated outpost, Magos Varnak, was a man of logic and data. He noted the reports of the dead worlds with a growing sense of unease. The pattern was undeniable, a slow creeping wave of absolute death advancing from the cold intergalactic void. He sent his own findings, bundled with the others, hoping for guidance, for aid, for anything. But no help was sent. Tyran was alone. The first true sign of the coming storm was not a grand fleet appearing in the heavens, but a subtle, chilling wrongness. The base astropath, whose mind was a conduit to the Imperium, found his psychic senses clouded. The comforting light of the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon of the Emperor himself, grew dim, obscured by a suffocating psychic pressure. It was a phenomenon that would later be given a name whispered in fear across the galaxy, the shadow in the warp. Communication with the wider Imperium was severed. The outpost was deaf and blind. Soon after, a survey ship, limping back to Tyran Primus from cataloguing yet another dead world, encountered a strange, dense cloud on the system's edge before the crew could properly analyze it. Their vessel was battered by what seemed to be organic mines, forcing a hasty retreat. The warning reached Magos Varnak just as the first wave of alien vessels entered Tyran's orbit. They were unlike anything ever recorded in the Imperial xenological archives. These were not ships of metal and plasma, but living creatures of monstrous scale. Their hides a carapace of blackened chitin, their forms a nightmarish fusion of claw, tentacle, and more. Without hesitation, Varnak ordered the defense lasers to fire. For over an hour, the storm-racked skies of Tyran were alight with incandescent energy, lances of pure power striking the bio-ships. Dozens of the smaller organisms were vaporized, their ichor burning in the upper atmosphere. Then, as abruptly as it began, the assault ceased. The alien fleet withdrew. A surge of triumphant confidence, perhaps born of desperation, filled the command bunker. Magos Varnak, believing he had repelled the invaders, made a fateful error. He ordered his small fleet of 3 Imperial Navy cruisers, the Fimpera Esphiste, the Phyteus Destiny, and the Sword of Warrior Sea, to pursue the fleeing enemy. Eager for victory, the cruisers pushed through the strange spore cloud that masked the enemy's retreat. What they found on the other side was not a routed foe, but a fleet of unimaginable size. The few dozen ships they had engaged were merely a scouting party, a tiny fraction of a swarm that numbered in the thousands. Before the Imperial captains could react, the trap was sprung. The vast Tyranid fleet changed course, falling upon the hopelessly outmatched cruisers. The fine Emperor, Esphistade, was the first to die, torn apart by swarms of smaller organisms. The Phyteus Destiny was dragged into the gaping maw of a hive ship, its hull groaning in protest before being crushed. Garbled Vox transmission reached Tyran Primus from the Thivan Sword of Warrior Seti, a scream of metal and men being torn asunder before it too fell silent. With Tyran's orbital defenses eliminated, the true invasion began. Thousands upon thousands of mycetic spores rained down from the heavens, overwhelming the remaining defense lasers. Many were blasted from the sky, but countless more plunged into the churning oceans surrounding Tyran Primus. The violent waters erupted as hordes of alien creatures burst from the spores, creatures that would one day be known as Hormagaunts and Termagants, a tide of living blades and needle-fanged mouths. They swarmed the shores of the volcanic islands, their sheer numbers a terrifying sight. The stationed Imperial Guard and Skitteriri defenders met them with disciplined volleys of las fire, cutting down wave after wave of the screeching monstrosities. But for every one that fell, 10 more seemed to take its place. The defenders were pushed back, bastion by bastion. Winged horrors with leathery wings threw themselves into the barrels of the defense lasers, clogging the massive weapons with their own incinerated bodies until the systems overloaded and fell silent. Enormous creatures, living battering rams, later designated as carnifexes, smashed through reinforced walls, trampling defenders and severing power lines. The outpost was overrun. In the command bunker, the last bastion of humanity on Tyran, Magos Varnak watched his world die. Through the few remaining functioning picked screens, he saw the flood of aliens rampaging through his once impregnable base. With the last of his strength, he initiated a final, desperate protocol. As the adamantium gate of the bunker finally buckled and crashed inwards, he pressed a switch, a data codex containing every recording, every picked capture, every scrap of information his tech, priests had gathered on the invaders, was jettisoned into a deep shaft, plunging thousands of meters below the base into the planet. S-crust, as the first Hormagaunts poured into the command complex, Varnak recorded a final chilling message, a warning to an Imperium that could not hear him. We cannot live through this. Mankind cannot live through this. In a single day they have covered this planet with a flood of living blades and needle, fanged mouths. Kill one, and 10 take its place. If they are truly without number, then our race is doomed. Nearly a year later, a lone vessel arrived at the dead world of Tyran. It belonged to Inquisitor Fidus Kryptman of the Ordo Xenos, a man whose foresight and grim determination had led him to investigate the strange pattern of dead worlds on the eastern fringe. He found a planet utterly transformed. The once turbulent oceans were gone, sucked dry. The very atmosphere had been stripped away, leaving a barren, lifeless rock. It was Kryptman who discovered the hidden data codex. As he reviewed its contents, the full, horrifying truth of the invasion was revealed to him. He saw the bio, ships, the endless swarms, the consumption of an entire world. It was he who gave this new ultimate predator its name, taken from the first world to fall to its hunger. The Tyranids, the Great Devourer had awoken, and its gaze was now fixed upon the glittering prize of the Milky Way. The first tyrannic war had begun. Number, Chapter 4. A cosmic consciousness takes form in the silent, sleeping void between galaxies. The nascent whispers of a new power began to stir. It was a consciousness born not of a single mind, but of a million minds, each a tiny spark of simple, brutal instinct. These were the proto-Tyranids, adrift in the endless dark, their individual lives short, violent, and ultimately meaningless. They hunted, they consumed, they propagated, their tiny dramas playing out on the forgotten canvases of dead worlds and shattered moons. But with each life, with each death, a faint psychic echo was left behind. A phantom resonance, a ghost of experience that lingered in the void long after the flesh had turned to dust. For millennia beyond counting, these echoes accumulated, swirling and coalescing in the utter blackness. They were the shared memories of hunger, of fear, of the simple, driving need to survive. Imagine, if you can, the behavior of social insects on an ancient, sun-drenched world. Think of the ant colony, a sprawling superorganism where each individual acts not for itself, but for the betterment of the whole. Though composed of countless individual ants, the colony functions as a single entity, a unified being with a shared purpose. This is the essence of a collective consciousness, a shared set of beliefs and ideas that operate as a unifying force. The proto-Tyranids, in their mindless struggles, were laying the groundwork for just such a phenomenon, but on a scale that would dwarf any terrestrial comparison. Their individual psychic echoes were the building blocks of a mind vast enough to span galaxies. In the deep time of the cosmos, There are periods of immense, world-altering change, sometimes followed by vast stretches of nothing. On ancient Earth, there is a geological mystery known as the Great Unconformity. It is a gap in the rock record, a missing chapter of the planet, its history, where over 1 billion years of stone has simply vanished. Geologists can lay a hand on the boundary, feeling the jarring transition from 5050 million year old rock to stone that is 1.7 billion years old. What cataclysm could erase such a vast span of time from the very bones of a world? Some theories point to a snowball Earth, a period when global glaciers scoured the planet, grinding mountains to dust and washing continents clean. In the void, a similar, but psychic, event was taking place. The swirling echoes of the proto-Tyranids reached a critical mass. The psychic static of 1 billion lives, each clamoring for survival, began to self-organize. Much like the simple, single-celled organisms that band together to form slime molds when resources are scarce, the disparate psychic energies of the proto-Tyranids began to coalesce. These individual cells on their own are simple, but together they form a collective that can solve mazes, learn from experience, and even share knowledge through fusion. They become a superorganism, a single entity born from the cooperation of many. So too did the echoes of the proto-Tyranids begin to fuse. The chaotic noise of individual survival began to harmonize, to find a common rhythm. It was a slow, glacial process, a psychic shift on a cosmological scale. The individual sparks of consciousness began to link, forming a vast and intricate network. The fear of one became the fear of all. The hunger of a single brood became the ravenous, insatiable appetite of a dawning god. A cosmic consciousness was taking form. It was not a consciousness in the way a human might understand it, full of nuance and introspection. It was something far more primal, a gestalt consciousness built on the singular, unwavering imperative that had driven its component parts. For eons, survive, consume, evolve. This new consciousness was a silent, unblinking eye in the void, an awareness that was everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the universe in its own small way, becoming aware of itself. But this was not a gentle philosophical awakening. It was a hungry awakening, a predatory awakening. The scattered, mindless proto-Tyranids were no longer just a species. They were becoming a weapon. They were the claws and teeth of a single, immense being, a superorganism of unimaginable scale. This new, unified mind began to exert its will. The random, chaotic movements of the proto-Tyranid swarms began to change. There was a new purpose in their endless journey through the dark. They were no longer just drifting, they were hunting. The scattered fleets, once isolated by unimaginable distances, were now connected by an invisible, unbreakable psychic thread. They were extensions of a single will, fingers on a single, grasping hand. This period of unification was not without its own violent upheavals. Just as the Cambrian explosion on ancient Earth saw a rapid burst of evolutionary innovation, a biological arms race sparked by the emergence of predators and prey, so too did the nascent hive mind drive its physical forms to new heights of deadly efficiency. The simple proto-Tyranids were reshaped, their forms twisted and perfected by the cold, calculating will of the new consciousness. New bioforms were engineered in the living flesh, forges of the hive ships, each one a more perfect instrument of consumption. It was a period of unimaginable biological creativity, a dark parody of life's vibrant explosion in the ancient seas of Earth. And then, after an age of silent internal evolution, the new consciousness felt a sudden, piercing flash of light. It was a psychic shockwave, a beacon of immense power that cut through the endless dark of the intergalactic void. It was the overloading of the Pharos device, a piece of ancient Necron technology during a forgotten battle in a distant, insignificant galaxy. The psychic scream of the dying machine was a dinner bell, a siren song that echoed across the unimaginable emptiness between galaxies. For the first time, the newly formed hive mind turned its singular, unblinking attention in a specific direction. It had a target. It had a destination. In that distant galaxy, there was life. There was biomass. There was a feast, unlike any it had ever known. The long, slow journey of the Tyranids was over. The Great Devourer had been born, and it was hungry. The scattered fleets, now united by a single terrifying purpose, began to move. Their pace quickened, a relentless tide of chitin and flesh, drawn inexorably towards the distant promise of a galaxy teeming with life. The silence of the void was broken by a single, silent, psychic scream that would echo through the ages, foin consume. The hive mind does not conquer. It does not invade in the way a lesser race might. It does not seek territory, or resources, or glory. It seeks only to feed, and to evolve. And before the feast must come the hunt. The Great Devourer does not blunder blindly through the void. It is a patient predator, and it sends whispers of its coming long before the shadow of its fleets darkens a star system. These whispers take the form of highly specialized bioforms, the vanguard organisms. They are the first tendrils of the Tyranid menace to touch a world, the silent heralds of utter annihilation. Far ahead of the main fleets, traveling through the cold and silent dark, are the vanguard drone ships. These creatures are a marvel of biological engineering, smaller and faster than the colossal hive ships that will follow. They are scouts, explorers sent to find worlds ripe with the precious biomass the swarm craves. They move with a stealth that belies their living nature, slipping through the gaps in a galaxy's defenses, unnoticed by the sentinels who watch the void. They travel for uncounted years, their purpose singular and unwavering. Once a suitable planet is found, these drone ships do not engage. They do not attack. Instead, they seed the world. They release their living cargo in fleshy pods called mycetic spores, which plummet through the atmosphere, often mistaken for meteor showers or orbital debris. Within these spores are the true pioneers of the Tyranid invasion, creatures designed for infiltration, for sabotage, and for sowing the seeds of terror long before the first warrior, beast, makes planetfall. The most insidious, and perhaps the most infamous of these, is the genestealer. To the untrained eye, a genestealer is a nightmare of chitin and claw. They are bipedal, with a perpetually crouched posture that speaks of coiled explosive energy. They possess two sets of arms, one pair ending in hands disturbingly similar to a human, the other tipped with rending claws that can tear through the thickest armor with contemptuous ease. Their heads are bulbous, housing a large and cunning brain, and their mouths are filled with sharp teeth. But their physical prowess is not what makes them so terrifying. It is their method of reproduction, their insidious means of spreading their genetic taint. A genestealer does not kill all its victims, it selects them. With a horrifying implantation of its genetic material, it infects a host, subtly altering their DNA. This creates a psychic link, a bond between the victim and the distant hive mind. The victim does not die. They live on, changed, their loyalty forever sworn to the Great Devourer. They become the first members of a genestealer cult. These cults are a cancer that grows in the heart of a world. The initial infection is passed down through generations. The first to be born from an infected host are grotesque hybrids, twisted mockeries of their parent species. But with each subsequent generation, the Tyranid features become less pronounced. After 4 generations, the hybrids are almost indistinguishable from the host species. They can infiltrate every level of society, from the lowest dregs in the underhives to the highest echelons of planetary governance. All the while, the psychic influence of the cult grows, a beacon in the warp that calls to the hungry fleets in the void. The cult works from within, weakening the planet's defenses, preparing it for the day of reckoning when the star children, their gods, finally arrive to deliver them. While the genestealers corrupt a world from within, another vanguard organism works to unravel it from the shadows. This creature is the lictor, a name whispered in fear on countless worlds. The lictor is a solitary hunter, a perfect predator, taller than a space marine. Its form is a terrifying fusion of insect and reptile, with long mantis-like claws and a segmented, chitinous body, but it is rarely seen. The lictor is a master of stealth, its skin a chameleonic surface that can perfectly mimic its surroundings, rendering it all but invisible to the naked eye. It moves with an unnatural silence, its hooved feet padded with vibration, absorbing hairs. A lictor can wait motionless for days, patiently stalking its prey, learning their routines, identifying their weaknesses. It is an opportunistic hunter, picking off isolated individuals, sowing fear and confusion. Its primary purpose is reconnaissance. It is the eyes and ears of the hive mind. When a lictor kills, it is with brutal efficiency, but its most horrifying weapons are its feeder tendrils. These whip, like appendages, are tipped with sharp, bony plates that can pierce a victim. Skull, the lictor then devours the brain, absorbing its memories, learning everything the victim knew. In this way, the hive mind gains invaluable intelligence about the planet, its defenses, the location of its armies, and the disposition of its leaders. As the lictor hunts, it leaves a pheromone trail, a scent that is imperceptible to other species, but is a clarion call to the Tyranid swarm. The more prey it finds, the stronger the trail becomes, drawing other Tyranids to the location. So even if a lictor is discovered and killed, its mission is already a success. The swarm knows where to find the feast, and where the vanguard organisms have prepared the way, the first wave of the true swarm is not far behind. This wave is often comprised of smaller, more numerous creatures, designed to overwhelm the enemy through sheer numbers. The termagants are a key part of this initial assault. Agile and cunning, they are bred for ranged combat, armed with symbiotic bio, weapons that fire flesh, eating beetles or venomous spines. Individually, they are not the most formidable of foes, but they attack in vast swarms, a chittering tide of chitin and death that can bog down even the most disciplined defenders. They are intelligent enough to seek out and exploit weaknesses, and they have a strong sense of self-preservation, often flanking their enemies to attack from unexpected angles. Accompanying the termagants are the hormagaunts, creatures born for the frenzy of close combat. They are a terrifying sight, a blur of motion as they leap and bound across the battlefield on their powerful hind legs. Their forelimbs are scything talons, razor-sharp blades of living bone that can slice through flesh and armor with equal ease. Hormagaunts are relentless, their hyperactive metabolism driving them to ceaselessly pursue their prey, ignoring wounds that would fell a lesser creature. They are the embodiment of the swarm's ferocity, a living wave of claws and teeth that crashes against the enemy lines, tearing them apart in a whirlwind of violence. These vanguard organisms, from the subtle genestealer to the frenzied hormagaunt, are but the first signs of the coming storm. They are the reaching tendrils of a galaxy, spanning hunger, the initial probes of an intelligence so vast and alien that it defies comprehension. They are the harbingers of the end, and their arrival on a world signals the beginning of a desperate fight for survival. A fight that few will ever win. In the vast, silent dark between galaxies, an event of terrible significance was about to unfold, unnoticed by the warring children of man. The stage for this unwitting invitation was a world named Sotha, a planet lush and green, nestled within the domain of Ultramar. It was, for all intents and purposes, a jewel, a quiet agri world supporting a small human colony. But Sotha held a secret, a legacy from a time long before humanity's first steps, buried deep within the stony heart of its tallest peak, Mount Pharos. This was not a human discovery, nor was it a relic of the Eldar. It was a piece of technology left behind by the ancient Necrons, a silent sleeping giant of quantum engineering. This device, which would come to be known only by the name of the mountain that concealed it, was the Pharos beacon. It was a quantum empathic resonance beacon, a device that operated not through the chaotic energies of the warp, but through the fundamental laws of reality itself. It could connect 2 points directly, ignoring the turbulent sea of the Empyrean, allowing for instantaneous communication and even teleportation across unimaginable distances. It functioned on empathy, on the focused desire of its user, making it a tool of incredible potential. For millennia, it lay dormant, its existence unknown, until the desperate days of the Horus Heresy, with the light of the Astronomicon, on Terra obscured by the roiling warp storms of the Ruin Storm. Robout Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, sought a new way to navigate the sundered galaxy and hold his fledgling empire, Imperium Secundus. Together, the task of understanding and awakening the Pharos fell to an unlikely hero, Barabbas D'Antioch, a warsmith of the Iron Warriors, disgraced and aged beyond his years by a temporal weapon. D'Antioch had remained loyal to the Emperor, defending his fortress against his own traitorous kin. Now, on Sotha, this master of siegecraft and fortification turned his considerable intellect to unlocking the secrets of the Necron device. He was not alone in this endeavor. He was joined by Alexis Pollux, captain of the Imperial Fists, 405th Company, a giant of a man with a mind as cold and logical as the stone he shaped. Animosity existed between their legions, the Iron Warriors and Imperial Fists being bitter rivals. Yet on the quiet world of Sotha, a deep and unexpected friendship grew between the two loyalists, forged in their shared duty. Under their watch, the Pharos was awakened. Its strange, empathic light became the new lodestar for the scattered loyalist forces, a beacon of hope in a galaxy consumed by darkness. It was this very light, however, that would attract a different kind of attention. The Night Lords, the pitiless sons of Conrad Kurz, had been skulking in the shadows of the Ultima Segmentum, drawn by the beacon's steady pulse. Their fleet, under the command of Krukesh the Pale, descended upon Sotha with the aim of capturing the powerful Xenos device for themselves. The battle for Sotha was a brutal affair. The small garrison of Ultramarines, the 199th Ajida Company, found themselves vastly outnumbered. The Night Lords, 20,000 strong, fell upon the planet, their siege tanks and assault vehicles carving paths of destruction. The capital city of Sothopolis was subjected to the traitor's particular brand of terror, its people massacred and tortured. But the defenders, led by the tactical genius of Pollux and the unyielding resolve of D'Antioch, held firm within the fortified structures around Mount Pharos. They knew that the beacon could not be allowed to fall into the hands of the traitors. The conflict reached its terrible climax within the primary control chamber of the Pharos itself. Alexis Pollux was captured and brought before the device, his mind and body subjected to agonizing torment as the Night Lords attempted to wrest the beacon secrets from him. Seeing his friend in such peril, and knowing the battle was otherwise lost, Barabbas D'Antioch made a fateful choice. He initiated a catastrophic overload of the Pharos' systems, a desperate, final act of defiance. He lured the Night Lord commanders into a trap, and with a final silent prayer, unleashed the full, untamed power of the ancient Necron engine. The resulting explosion was not one of fire and shrapnel, but of pure, unrestrained quantum energy. It was a silent detonation that tore through the chamber, killing most of the Night Lords instantly and disabling systems on their ships in orbit. It was the act that won the battle, but it came at a terrible cost. Barabbas D'Antioch was mortally wounded, dying in the arms of the friend he had saved. His last words spoke of a friendship that could exist even in a universe of terror and betrayal. Hours later, when Robout Guilliman's relief force finally arrived, guided by the Pharos' last dying pulse, they found Alexis Pollux still cradling the body of the fallen warsmith, a silent, grieving giant. But the consequences of D'Antioch's sacrifice reached far, far beyond the Sothan system. In that moment of overload, the Pharos beacon unleashed a psychic shockwave of unimaginable intensity. It was a flash of pure energy, lasting only milliseconds, but it blazed brighter than the Astronomicon. This was not a signal that traveled through the warp, it was a pulse that shot through the fabric of reality itself, moving many times faster than the speed of light. It screamed out from the Milky Way, a flare of existence in the silent star, dusted void between galaxies. And out there, in that endless cold night, something was listening, far beyond the galactic fringe, in a darkness deeper than any human could comprehend. A consciousness that had slumbered for eons stirred. It was a being of limitless, unimaginable hunger, a million frozen, unblinking eyes, sensors on the vanguard of a great and terrible fleet, registered the fleeting pulse of light. The message was received, the stimuli processed by a dreaming gargantuan mind. The purpose of the sentinel eyes was served, and they died. The signal was analyzed, compared against all the parameters for the one thing this entity sought above all else. Prey. Slowly, with the glacial, inexorable movement of a continent, the Great Devourer shifted its course. It had been moving through the intergalactic void, perhaps towards another meal, another galaxy teeming with life to be consumed. But now it had a new destination. The dying cry of the Pharos, an act of selfless heroism meant to save a handful of worlds, had instead doomed 1,000 times 1,000 more. It was an unwitting summons. A dinner bell rung across the cosmic ocean, and the Hive Mind had heard its call. The Tyranids were coming, in the cold, silent depths of the eastern fringe, far from the golden light of terror. The ocean world of Tyran slumbered under a turbulent sky. 80% of its surface was a single planet-spanning ocean, a churning mass of dark water, populated by leviathans and colossal krakens that swam in the crushing blackness below. It was an unimportant world, 60,000 light-years from the Throne world, notable only for the small Adeptus Mechanicus research station, nestled on its largest chain of volcanic islands. The outpost known as Tyran Primus. Here, a few hundred tech priests and explorators, under the command of Magos Varnak, went about their sacred duties. Their task was simple, yet vital, to study the unknown sectors at the galaxy's edge, cataloguing phenomena and life forms for the great archives on Mars. Theirs was a quiet, isolated existence. The days were marked by the hum of machinery, the chanting of Binharic prayers, and the constant, rhythmic crash of waves against the hardened ceramite walls of their fortress. The outpost was heavily fortified, not just against the planet's fearsome storms and monstrous sea life, but also against any wandering pirates or unknown alien threats that might lurk in the unexplored frontier. 4 immense defense lasers stood sentinel, protected by void shield generators, their barrels pointed towards the perpetually overcast heavens. This formidable defense, supported by Imperial Guard veterans from Katachan and Varnak, as own Skitari bodyguards, had proven more than sufficient for any imagined threat. The first sign that something was wrong was not a thunderous explosion or a screaming alarm, but a profound and unnerving silence. It began in the astropathic choir, the sensitive minds tasked with maintaining contact with the vast Imperium, the comforting psychic symphony of humanity. The distant hum of countless souls across the galaxy began to fade. It was replaced by a growing static, a psychic deadening that felt like being slowly submerged in cold, empty water. This phenomenon, which would later be given a name of dread, the shadow in the warp, was at first just a mystery, a source of growing anxiety. The astropaths complained of nightmares, of a constant, pervasive feeling of being watched by a singular, hungry mind. Soon, their whispers turned to screams as the pressure mounted, some clawing at their own eyes to escape the sibilant chittering that filled their thoughts. This psychic blindness was terrifying. Tyran Primus was cut off, an island not just in a planetary ocean, but in the cosmic void itself. All attempts to send or receive messages failed, swallowed by the oppressive silence. The feeling of dread began to seep out from the choir chambers and into the rest of the outpost. Mundane crew members felt a constant, low-level panic, a sense of impending doom they could not explain. The local sea creatures, usually a common sight from the reinforced observatory windows, disappeared into the abyssal depths, fleeing from some unseen terror. The very air seemed to grow heavy, thick with an alien wrongness. For a decade leading up to this moment, Magos Varnak and his explorator teams had been filing unsettling reports. During their census of the surrounding star systems, they had discovered worlds that were inexplicably dead. Planets once known to have been teeming with life were now barren rock, stripped of all biomass, their atmospheres thin and their oceans gone. Not even bacteria remained. These dead worlds were a chilling mystery, but the administratum was a slow moving beast, and the reports were simply filed away in some dusty archive, deemed a low priority. Now, Varnak began to suspect that the fate of those dead worlds was coming for Tyran. The first tangible warning came by a stroke of luck. An explorator vessel, returning from a survey of yet another lifeless planet, limped back to Tyran Primus. On the edge of the system, it had encountered a vast, silent cloud of unidentified objects. Before the crew could react, their ship was crippled by what they described as fleshy, organic minds that seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of their own. The damaged vessel barely made it back, its crew carrying a dire warning of a silent, approaching fleet. Several days later, the sky changed. Strange, membranous spores, each the size of a lander, began to rain down from the upper atmosphere. They were vanguard organisms, the first wave of a silent biological invasion. Lictors, ghost-like hunters, moved unseen through the volcanic crags surrounding the outpost, their chameleonic skin making them all but invisible. Genestealers, multi-limbed horrors, began to probe the lower levels and ventilation shafts, skittering shadows in the dark. Patrols of Katachan guardsmen went missing. Vox, links would crackle with a moment of confused shouting and the sound of rending metal, then fall silent. Picked feeds would show a brief, distorted glimpse of a clawed limb or a fanged maw before cutting to static. The initial assault was a test, a wave of ships, living vessels of chitin and flesh, hurled themselves at the planet. Magos Varnak, a true servant of the machine god, met them with the full fury of his defenses. The 4 giant defense lasers roared to life, lancing the sky with focused energy. For over an hour, the heavens above Tyran Primus were filled with silent, incandescent explosions as the ships were torn apart. Then, as suddenly as it began, the alien fleet withdrew, filled with confidence and perhaps arrogance. Varnak made a fatal error. Believing he had repelled the invaders, he ordered his small flotilla of 3 Endeavour light cruisers to pursue the fleeing vessels. The Imperial ships pushed through the cloud of spores that masked the main Tyranid fleet and discovered the horrifying truth. The initial attack had been a feint. Fewer than a dozen alien ships had been destroyed. Before them hung a fleet of several thousand vessels, a swarm so dense it blotted out the stars. The Tyranid fleet turned as one, a silent, coordinated predator, and fell upon the Imperial cruisers. The warships fought bravely, but they were hopelessly outmatched. One by one, they were torn apart, their crews devoured by swarms of genestealers that breached their hulls. The last Vox transmission from the cruiser Sword of Warrior C was a scream of agony before it too fell silent, left to drift in space as a lifeless husk. With Tyran's orbital defenses eliminated, the true invasion began. Thousands of mycetic spores were launched from the Hive fleet, plunging into the stormy oceans around the outpost. The turbulent waters boiled and thrashed as colossal creatures burst from the pods, tearing through the native sea krakens with horrific ease. Then the first wave scaled the walls of Tyran Primus. What followed was a slaughter. Disciplined volleys of fire from the Imperial Guard held back the tide at first. The veteran Katakin fighters selling their lives dearly, but for every creature they cut down, 10 more took its place. The swarm was endless, a flood of living blades and needle-fanged mouths, hormagaunts, skittering creatures with scythe-like talons, swarmed over the defense bastions. Larger bioforms, monstrous carnifexes, smashed against the walls, their impact shaking the very foundations of the outpost. The defense lasers were overrun, their crews swamped by the alien tide. Soon, the entire facility was a maelstrom of desperate fighting and inevitable death. The command bunker became the last point of resistance. Margos Varnak watched on his few remaining displays as his perfect, logical fortress was systematically dismantled and consumed by the Xenos horde. The adamantite gate of the bunker began to groan and buckle under the relentless assault of something massive outside. With his last moments, Varnak performed his final duty. As the gate finally caved in and a wave of screeching hormagaunts poured into the room, he pressed a switch. This act sent a hardened data codex containing all his recordings and analysis of this new foe, plummeting into a secure vault deep beneath the base. It was his legacy, a final warning to the Imperium. His last recorded words, a panicked prayer to his god, were captured for posterity. Death, by the machine god, death is here. Then, Magos Varnak was torn asunder, and the last light of humanity on Tyran Primus was extinguished. The planet fell silent once more, but this was no longer the oppressive quiet of the shadow in the warp. It was the silence of a world being eaten alive, a quiet broken only by the sounds of consumption. As the Hive fleet descended to strip Tyran of all life, leaving behind nothing but another dead, barren rock in the cold darkness of space. It began as a whisper in the dark, a faint and chilling hum at the very edge of perception. On the isolated Adeptus Mechanicus explorator base of Tyran Primus, nestled within the turbulent oceans of the world, Tyran, the first signs were subtle, easily dismissed. The men and women of the station, diligent and disciplined servants of the machine god, were accustomed to the planet's tempestuous nature, its violent storms, and the strange cries of its colossal sea creatures. But this was different. A creeping sense of unease settled over the outpost, a silent dread that had no source and no name. It was a feeling that slithered into the quiet moments, a cold weight in the pit of the stomach that spoke of impending, unavoidable doom. The ordinary citizens and laborers were the first to truly feel its touch. Sleep, once a welcome respite from their arduous duties, became a realm of terror. They were plagued by terrible nightmares, chaotic and vivid dreams filled with screeching, chittering sounds, and the suffocating feeling of being watched by a billion hungry eyes. They would awake in cold sweats, their hearts pounding, the sense of dread clinging to them like a damp shroud long after the images had faded. Productivity faltered as exhaustion and a pervasive, gnawing anxiety took hold. Tempers frayed, and arguments broke out over trivial matters. The disciplined order of the Mechanicus outpost slowly beginning to fray at the edges. For those with even a flicker of psychic sensitivity, the experience was magnified 1,000-fold. It began as a dull headache, a persistent throb behind the eyes that no unguent or meditation could soothe. Soon, it escalated into searing pain, a feeling as though their very skulls were being squeezed in a vice. The air, once clear, now seemed thick with a psychic static that scratched and clawed at their minds, a constant, irritating pressure that made coherent thought an almost impossible task. But it was the astropaths who bore the full, horrifying brunt of this unseen assault. These soul-bound servants of the Emperor were the vital communication link for the isolated outpost, their minds the bridges across the vast, lonely emptiness of space. Their connection to the immaterium, the very source of their power, became a conduit for a psychic maelstrom of unimaginable intensity. What was once a familiar sea of psychic currents and whispers was now a screaming, deafening hurricane. The sibilant chittering that haunted the dreams of the common folk was a deafening roar in the minds of the astropaths. They described it as the sound of a billion alien minds, a cacophony of endless ravenous hunger that drowned out all other thoughts. One by one, their minds shattered under the strain. Some were found clawing at their own faces, their eyes bleeding freely as they screamed uncontrollably, desperate to silence the noise that only they could hear. Others, driven to the absolute brink of madness, took more drastic measures, smashing their heads against reinforced bulkheads in a final futile attempt to find peace. The choir chamber, once a place of serene communion with the cosmos, became a charnel house of broken minds and bodies. The vital link to the Imperium was severed, not by jamming signals or solar flares, but by a psychic presence so overwhelming that it simply blotted out the light of the Astronomicon, plunging Tyran into an abyss of silent isolation. This phenomenon, this suffocating psychic blanket, was later given a name by the few who would survive its first horrifying appearance: the shadow in the warp. It was not a deliberate, targeted attack in the conventional sense, but a byproduct of the approaching hive mind itself. The constant, two-way communication between the trillions of organisms that comprise the hive fleet created a psychic signal so powerful, so utterly alien, that it drowned out all other psychic phenomena. Imagine trying to hear a single whispered word in the midst of a freight train's deafening roar. That was the effect of the shadow in the warp on the delicate psychic energies of the galaxy. It was a psychic DDoS attack on a cosmic scale, a wave of pure, undiluted psychic noise that overwhelmed and shattered the minds of all but the strongest psychers. The effects were not merely psychological. The very fabric of reality seemed to thin and warp under the strain. Navigators, the mutated humans who guided ships through the treacherous currents of the warp, were rendered blind and useless. Those who dared to look into the immaterium were met not with the familiar, swirling energies of the warp, but with a horrifying living darkness that stared back with a sentience, so alien and terrifying that it drove them to utter madness. Ships attempting to enter or leave the Tyrant system found their warp drives struggling. The complex calculations of their navigators thrown into chaos. Warp travel, already a perilous undertaking, became a near impossibility. On Tyran Primus, the descent into madness accelerated. Megos Varnak, the stoic and logical ruler of the outpost, watched as his carefully ordered world crumbled around him. His faith in the Omnissiah and the cold, hard logic of the machine offered no defense against the foe that attacked the very soul. He saw his most trusted tech, priests, descend into paranoia, their augmetics twitching uncontrollably as they muttered about the machine, spirits screaming. Reports from the Medicae bays spoke of rampant hysteria, of men and women simply collapsing into catatonic states, their minds utterly broken by the relentless psychic pressure. The shadow in the warp did more than just isolate and terrorize. It was a weapon of despair. It instilled a pervasive, unshakable dread into the hearts of Tyran. As defenders, a deep-seated certainty that they were doomed. Hope withered and died in its oppressive gloom. Courage gave way to a primal, instinctual fear that gnawed at the edges of even the most hardened veteran's resolve. The defenders of Tyran Primus, the disciplined soldiers of the Imperial Guard, and the stoic Skitari of the Adeptus Mechanicus found their morale eroding with every passing hour. They would stand on the rain, lashed battlements, staring out at the turbulent grey ocean, and feel a chilling premonition of their own demise. They were cut off, alone, and besieged by an enemy they could not see or comprehend. The chittering whispers seemed to be carried on the wind itself, a promise of the unspeakable horrors that were to come. The shadow in the warp had descended, and beneath its suffocating pall, the tiny isolated world of Tyran awaited its final terrible fate. The hive mind does not think as a singular entity. It does not possess a voice or a consciousness in the way that we might understand it. Instead, it is a chorus, a symphony of countless individual wills, all subsumed into a single, overriding purpose. And the instruments of this symphony are the Tyranid organisms themselves, each one a masterpiece of biological engineering, each one a living weapon, perfectly adapted to its role in the great and terrible orchestra of consumption. Let us begin with the endless tide, the chittering sea of claws and teeth that washes over doomed worlds. These are the Gaunts, the most numerous of the hive mind's creations, They are the foot soldiers, the cannon fodder, and the ever-present threat that grinds civilizations to dust through sheer, overwhelming numbers. The Hormagaunt is a creature of pure, unadulterated aggression. It is a lithe and wiry beast, a blur of motion on 6 limbs. 2 of these limbs are powerful legs, allowing it to leap and bound across the battlefield with terrifying speed. The other 4 end in razor-sharp scything talons. These are not simply blades of bone. They are living weapons, honed to a monomolecular edge, capable of slicing through ceramite armor and flesh with equal ease. The Hormagaunt's sole purpose is to close with the enemy and tear them to shreds. It is a creature of instinct, driven by a relentless hunger to kill. When a swarm of Hormagaunts descends, it is like a living river of death, flowing into every trench and bunker, leaving nothing but mangled corpses in its wake. Its counterpart is the Termagant. Where the Hormagaunt is a creature of melee, the Termagant is a ranged horror. It is a smaller, more hunched creature, its forelimbs fused into a symbiotic bioweapon. The most common of these is the Fleshborer. This grotesque weapon fires living ammunition. Vile, beetle-like creatures that burrow into their victims, chewing through flesh and bone with horrifying speed. The sound of a massed volley of fleshborers is a sickening, wet tearing sound, followed by the screams of those unfortunate enough to be targeted. Termagants are not designed for prolonged engagements. They are a tide of living artillery, a creeping barrage that pins down the enemy, sowing terror and confusion, paving the way for the larger, more specialized beasts that follow. Among the vanguard of any Tyranid invasion force, you will find the Genestealer. These are insidious creatures, a cancer that can fester within a society for generations before the main fleet even arrives. A Genestealer is a 4-armed killing machine, a blur of purple and blue chitin. Its claws can tear through the thickest armor, and its reflexes are lightning fast. But its most terrifying weapon is its ovipositor, a fleshy tube that extends from its mouth, capable of implanting a victim with its own genetic material. The unfortunate soul who receives this Genestealer's kiss is not killed. Instead, they are subtly altered, their own DNA rewritten. They become a slave to the Hive Mind, a willing pawn in its grand design. They will return to their society and they will breed. Their children will be hybrids, monstrosities that appear mostly human, but carry the Tyranid taint within them. These hybrids will form secret cults, worshipping the Hive Mind as a star-faring god. They will infiltrate every level of society, from the lowest dregs to the highest echelons of power, and when the Hive fleet finally arrives, they will rise up, an army of traitors from within, ready to welcome their creators with open arms and open blades. Lurking in the shadows, a silent predator is the Lictor. This is the Hive Mind's scout and assassin. The Lictor is a master of camouflage, its chameleonic skin able to perfectly mimic its surroundings. It can remain motionless for days, even weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It moves with an eerie silence, its clawed feet making no sound on the ground. Its most distinctive features are its feeder tendrils. These prehensile appendages writhe and twitch around its mouth, constantly tasting the air, searching for the scent of prey. When it finds a target, the Lictor strikes with blinding speed. Its massive scything talons can decapitate a man in an instant. Its flesh hooks, fired from its forelimbs, can pierce armor and drag a victim into the shadows, never to be seen again. The Lictor's purpose is not just to kill. It is to sow fear and paranoia, to make the enemy feel as though they are being watched from every shadow, to know that they are being hunted. It is a ghost in the darkness, a nightmare made real. And then there are the living tanks, the behemoths of the Tyranid swarm. The Carnifex is a mountain of muscle and chitin, a walking battering ram that can smash through fortress walls and trample tanks underfoot. It is a creature of pure brute force, armed with a variety of bioweapons, from massive scything talons that can cleave a battle tank in two, to bioplasma cannons that vomit forth gobs of molten energy. A charging Carnifex is a terrifying sight, an unstoppable force of nature that leaves a trail of destruction in its wake. They are often called screamer killers, a name earned from the terrifying shriek they emit as they charge into battle, a sound that can shatter the resolve of even the most hardened soldiers. Towering above them all is the Hive Tyrant. This is the commander of the Tyranid swarm, a conduit for the Hive Mind's will. The Hive Tyrant is a massive creature, a terrifying fusion of speed, strength, and psychic power. It is a formidable warrior in its own right, armed with bone swords that can parry a power weapon and a lash whip that can snap a man in two. But its true power lies in its connection to the Hive Mind. It is a psychic beacon, a synapse creature that directs the lesser Tyranid organisms around it. Through the Hive Tyrant, the Hive Mind can see, and it can command. To face a Hive Tyrant is to face the Hive Mind itself, to feel the crushing weight of its alien intellect pressing down on you, to know that you are nothing more than an obstacle to be consumed. But the symphony of biohorror does not end there. For every battlefield role, the Hive Mind has created a specialized organism. The Tyrant Guard are heavily armored bodyguards, their bodies little more than a living shield for their Hive Tyrant masters. The Zoanthropes are psychic artillery, their massive brains crackling with raw warp energy, capable of unleashing devastating psychic blasts. The Biovores are living mortars, their bodies convulsing as they launch, spore mines into the enemy ranks. These mines are not simple explosives. They are living organisms, floating sacks of gas and flesh that detonate in a shower of acid and shrapnel when they detect a target. The Pyrovore is a walking flamethrower, its gullet spewing a torrent of corrosive chemicals that can melt through armor and flesh alike. The Ripper swarms are the janitors of the battlefield, a writhing carpet of tiny ravenous creatures that consume the dead and the wounded, leaving nothing behind but bare rock. Every organism, from the smallest Ripper to the mightiest Hive Tyrant, is a testament to the Hive Mind's terrifying ingenuity. They are a symphony of biohorror, a perfectly orchestrated nightmare that has consumed countless worlds and will undoubtedly consume countless more. Each creature is a note in a song of annihilation, a song that echoes across the stars, a chilling prelude to the silence that follows in its wake. The Hive Mind's creativity, however, is not limited to the battlefield. The swarm is a complete ecosystem, a traveling city of flesh and chitin, and it requires a vast and varied cast of organisms to maintain it. There are the gargoyles, winged horrors that fill the skies, their leathery wings blotting out the sun. They are armed with flesh-bearers, spitting death from above, a living carpet of terror that descends upon the enemy. Their chittering cries, a harbinger of the swarm's arrival. The harpy is a larger, more terrifying beast of the air, a monstrous creature that combines the features of a bat and a dragon. It can drop spore mines from its underbelly, creating a toxic fog that chokes the life from the air, or it can dive bomb the enemy, its massive scything talons capable of tearing apart aircraft and tanks. On the ground, the Trigon is a subterranean nightmare. This massive serpentine creature can burrow through solid rock with its massive claws, emerging from the ground in a shower of earth and stone, right in the heart of the enemy's defenses. It is a creature of ambush and terror, a living earthquake that can swallow entire squads of soldiers whole. Its smaller cousin, the Ravener, is a creature of lightning-fast strikes. A pack of Ravenous can move through the earth as if it were water, emerging for a brief, bloody moment to eviscerate their prey before disappearing back into the ground, leaving behind nothing but confusion and mangled corpses. Then there are the truly alien and unsettling creatures, the ones that defy easy categorization. The Maleceptor is a psychic monstrosity, its body a grotesque fusion of brain and flesh. It is a living psychic capacitor, absorbing the mental energies of its victims and then unleashing them in a devastating wave of psychic force that can shatter minds and boil blood. The Toxicrine is a walking chemical weapon, a tangle of writhing tentacles that drip with a cocktail of hypertoxic venoms. Its very presence is poisonous, the air around it shimmering with a sickly green haze. A single touch from one of its tentacles can cause a man's flesh to slough off his bones, his organs to liquefy in a matter of seconds. And we must not forget the living artillery, the creatures that can deliver death from afar. The exocrine is a walking cannon, its massive plasmic weapon capable of firing a stream of molten energy that can melt through the thickest fortress walls. The Tyranofex is even larger, a walking battleship armed with a rupture cannon that fires a shell of compressed biomatter with such force that it can punch a hole through a mountain. These are not simply weapons. They are living creatures, their hearts beating in time with the thrum of the hive mind, their every action dictated by its all-consuming will. This symphony of bio-horror is a testament to the Tyranids' terrifying adaptability. They do not invent, they evolve. They do not build, they grow. Every world they consume, every species they devour, adds a new instrument to their orchestra of death. They are the ultimate predators, the perfect killing machines, and they are coming. The symphony of bio-horror is playing across the galaxy, and for countless worlds, it is the last sound they will ever hear. It is a lullaby of annihilation, a final terrifying chorus before the silence of the void. And as the last notes of this chorus fade, a new, more terrifying sound begins to emerge. The sound of a billion mouths, all chewing in unison. The sound of a galaxy being devoured. The hunger is all. It is a concept that defies mortal understanding, for it is not merely an absence of sustenance. It is a presence, a crushing psychic weight that announces the Great Devourer's arrival, long before the first bioship darkens a system's star. It is a cold, silent scream that echoes in the minds of all living things, a fundamental constant of the Tyranid race to consume, to absorb, to leave nothing behind. This is the truth of their existence, the single, unifying purpose that drives trillions upon trillions of organisms across the void, the endless hunger, and married to this hunger, forever entwined with it, is the species' most terrifying and defining trait, its relentless evolution. The two are inseparable, a perfect and horrifying cycle. The hunger drives the consumption of biomass, and the biomass provides the raw material for evolution. With every world stripped bare, with every species devoured, the hive mind learns. It adapts, it improves. The Tyranid swarm that arrives in a new system is never the same one that left the last. It is always stronger, faster, more efficient, and more terrible. At the heart of this process, nestled deep within the cavernous, pulsating interiors of the largest hive ships, lie the architects of this change, the Norn Queens. They are beings of immense scale and unfathomable intelligence, less individuals and more living, breathing crucibles of genetic mastery. A Norn Queen is the womb and the mind of the fleet, the engine of creation that gives birth to every warrior, every monster, every single bioform that makes up the swarm. Imagine a chamber the size of a city, walls of living flesh weeping with nutrient, rich fluids. Here, the Norn Queen lies. A mountain of organic technology, her immense body, a lattice of ovipositors, fetal sacs, and genetic looms. Into her great maws are pumped the psychoactive slurry harvested from devoured worlds, a thick, viscous fluid drawn up from the planet's surface through colossal capillary towers that pierce the heavens. This slurry is more than just food. It is a library of life. Within it are the disassembled genetic codes, the memories, the very essence of every living thing consumed by the swarms below. The Norn Queen processes this information with an efficiency that would shame the most advanced Adeptus Mechanicus cogitator. Her genetic shredder organs break down the raw material, sorting and cataloging every useful strand of DNA. She is the ultimate bioprospector, sifting through the biological heritage of a billion-year-old world for anything of value. A particular toxin from a predator vine, the hardened carapace of a subterranean beetle, the rapid cellular regeneration of a strange oceanic leviathan, all are identified, isolated, and stored within a vast genetic bank. This is the true purpose of the endless hunger, to gather not just sustenance, but knowledge, to steal the evolutionary triumphs of countless other species and make them the Tyranid's own. Once a useful trait is identified, the Norn Queen begins her work. She is a master artist, and her medium is life itself. She can weave new genetic sequences, combining traits from disparate organisms to create something entirely new, something perfectly suited for a specific purpose. The birth of these new creatures can happen in a myriad of ways, each tailored for maximum speed and efficiency. Some begin as tiny, writhing larvae, spilling from fleshy orifices in their millions. Others are grown in amniotic sacs that hang like grotesque fruit from umbilical branches, gestating until they are fully formed. Some are laid as leathery eggs, nurtured in brooding chambers until they hatch. This process of adaptation is not random. It is guided, deliberate, and chillingly precise. When a hive fleet encounters a new prey species, the initial waves of the invasion serve as a reconnaissance force. The vanguard organisms, the lictors, the genestealers, the ravenous, do more than just sow terror and disrupt defenses. They are living sensors, gathering battlefield data that is psychically relayed back to the Norn Queens. Every exchange of fire, every casualty, every tactical response from the enemy is analyzed. If the defenders are heavily armored, like the Astra Militarum, the next wave of gaunts might be spawned with glands that secrete a more corrosive bioacid, or their scything talons might be grown from denser, armor-piercing chitin. They might birth waves of biovores, living artillery pieces that launch shells of flesh-eating organisms, perfectly designed to shred through flak armor and flesh alike. When Hive Fleet Gorgon encountered the technologically advanced Tau, it faced a crisis. The Tau's long-range pulse rifles and agile crisis battlesuits inflicted heavy casualties. In response, Gorgon's Norn Queens adapted at a terrifying rate. They spawned hormogaunts with adrenal glands that pushed their speed to impossible levels, allowing them to cross the kill zones before the T-Tar could bring their superior firepower to bear. They created carnifexes with thicker, more resilient carapaces, layered with ablative plating that could absorb and dissipate energy blasts. The T-Tar, in turn, adapted their technology, creating a deadly arms race between biological evolution and technological innovation. Against the brute force and fungal biology of the orcs, the Hive Mind learns to counter strength with overwhelming strength. Tyranids fighting orcs have been observed as larger and more aggressive than typical strains, glutted on the potent orc biomass. The Norn Queens birth creatures designed for sheer attrition, able to withstand the greenskins' crude but effective weaponry, and reply with even greater savagery. Perhaps most insidiously, when facing the psychic might of the Eldari, the swarm evolves on a non-physical level. The Zoanthrope, a powerful psyker artillery beast, is believed to have been created after the Hive Mind absorbed Eldari genetic material. It took the Eldari's greatest strength, their mastery of the warp, and turned it into a weapon against them. This is the ultimate expression of the Tyranid threat. They do not just defeat their enemies, they consume their very nature and add it to their own terrible arsenal. This evolution is a continuous flowing process within a single planetary invasion which can last for weeks or months. Multiple generations of bioforms can be spawned, fought, and reabsorbed. The battlefield itself becomes the laboratory. Ineffective strains are mercilessly thrown at the enemy to exhaust their ammunition. Their bodies then collected by Ripper swarms and returned to the reclamation pools. The slurry from these fallen warriors is sent back to the Norn Queens, carrying with it the final report of their failure. The Queens learn from these mistakes, tweaking the genetic code, reinforcing a weakness, enhancing a strength, before birthing the next, improved generation. Every creature, from the smallest Ripper to the mightiest Biotitan, is a disposable asset, a temporary solution to a tactical problem. The Hive Mind feels no remorse in sacrificing billions of its creatures, because every loss is an investment in future victory. Every fallen Tyranid is simply biomass to be recycled and repurposed. The end result of this cycle of hunger and evolution is total consumption. Once all resistance is broken, the final stage of the harvest begins. The planet itself is unmade, Great organisms digest the very soil, while atmospheric processes suck the air and oceans dry. All life, all water, all organic matter is rendered down into that nutrient-rich soup and siphoned into the waiting bioships. What is left behind is a barren, airless rock, stripped of everything down to its bedrock, a silent monument to the Great Devourer's passing. And then, the Hive fleet moves on, larger, stronger, and more knowledgeable than before. The endless hunger drives it forward, and its relentless evolution ensures that whatever horrors await it in the next star system, it will be ready, it will learn, it will adapt, and it will consume. It is a force of nature perfected, a tide of hungry ghosts that learns the shape of the shore before it crashes down, ensuring that with every wave, it erodes a little more of the galaxy until nothing is left. The tendrils of the Great Devourer tightened their grip on the galaxy's edge. The warnings from Tyrant Primus, garbled and choked by the shadow in the warp, had come too late. What followed was not a war in any sense humanity could comprehend, but a consumption. System after system winked out of existence, not conquered, but eaten. Planets once teeming with life were left as barren, lifeless rocks, scoured clean of every microbe. This was the relentless advance of Hive Fleet Behemoth. Unlike the insidious infiltration that would characterize later Hive fleets, Behemoth was a blunt instrument of annihilation. It was a roaring, screaming wave of biomass that crashed against the eastern fringe with singular, brutal purpose: to devour. There was no subtlety to its assault, no grand strategy beyond a direct and overwhelming charge into the heart of the galaxy. It moved with the momentum of a falling star, a juggernaut that crushed everything in its path, its hunger seemingly as vast as the void itself. Behemoth's path was a trail of cosmic destruction. Hundreds of star systems were harvested, their civilizations stripped bare. Every scrap of life, every drop of water, every ounce of atmosphere was absorbed into the ravenous fleet. The Hive Mind, the gestalt consciousness that guided this terrifying force, was learning. With each consumed world, it sampled new biomass, dissected new tactics, and refined its bioforms. The swarms grew larger, the creatures more monstrous. The Imperium, slow to react to the scattered and unbelievable reports, finally began to grasp the scale of the threat. The name given to this new Xenos horror was born from the first world to fall, Tyran. They were the Tyranids, and their first great wave was named Behemoth, a title befitting the ancient monsters of Terran myth. As Behemoth carved its bloody sway through the eastern fringe, it encountered other forms of life, none of which were spared. The Jagger system, infested with a boisterous warband of orc freebooters, known as the Star Crumpers, became another feeding ground. The orcs, ever eager for a good fight, met the Tyranids with their typical gusto. Their ramshackle ships clashed with the living bioships of the Hive fleet in a chaotic and brutal confrontation. For a time, the orcs' sheer belligerence seemed to hold the tide at bay. But the Tyranids did not fight for glory or territory, they fought to consume. The Hive Mind adapted, learning the orcs' crude tactics and turning their aggression against them. The Star Crumpers were overwhelmed, their biomass adding to the ever-growing strength of Behemoth. The Imperium's response, when it finally came, was centered on the realm of Ultramar, the jewel of the segmentum Ultima. Marnius Calgar, the stoic and resolute chapter master of the Ultramarines, declared that Macragay, their homeworld, would be the firebreak against this extragalactic inferno. Heeding the dire intelligence gathered by Inquisitor Kryptman of the Ordo Xenos, Calgar began to fortify his domain. Macragay was to become the anvil upon which Hive Fleet Behemoth would be broken. An enormous battle fleet was assembled in orbit above the pristine world. The mighty battle barges of the Ultramarines stood, shoulder to shoulder, with heavy cruisers of the Ultramar defense fleet. Even lightly armed merchantmen and privateers were requisitioned, their crews grimly determined to defend their homes. Star Nova-class orbital weapons stations, ancient and powerful relics of a bygone age, were brought to full readiness. On the planet below, a meticulous network of defenses was constructed. Calgar, a master strategist, planned for every contingency. If the fleet in orbit could not halt the Tyranids, the defenders would fall back to the planet's formidable polar fortresses and hold out until reinforcements could arrive. The arrival of Hive Fleet Behemoth in the Macragge system was a sight of breathtaking horror. The void itself seemed to recoil as the monstrous fleet translated from the warp. A living tide of chitin, flesh, and claws blotted out the stars. The space battle that ensued was a maelstrom of unimaginable violence. Imperial ships, crewed by valiant men and women, unleashed fusillades of macro cannon shells and lance batteries. They tore great chunks from the Tyranid bioships, but for every vessel they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The Tyranids responded with a storm of living projectiles and corrosive acids. Their ships were not mere vessels, they were creatures, and they fought with a primal fury that naval tactics could not predict. Despite the bravery of the Imperial crews and the martial prowess of the Ultramarines, the orbital defenses began to crumble. The Tyranid fleet, a seemingly endless ocean of monsters, was simply too vast. With access to Macragge now open, the Hive fleet unleashed its primary invasion force. Thousands upon thousands of mycetic spores, fleshy orbital drop pods, rained down from the heavens. They streaked through the atmosphere, their descent a promise of the slaughter to come. The spores slammed into the planet's surface, disgorging a chittering horde of alien nightmares. Termagants, their flesh-bearers spitting living ammunition, swarmed across the verdant fields of Macragge. Genestealers, with their lightning-fast reflexes and diamond-hard claws, sought out any weakness in the Imperial lines. Towering carnifexes, living battering rams of muscle and chitin, smashed through fortifications with contemptuous ease. The initial ground battles were desperate and bloody. The Ultramarines, finest of the Adeptus Astartes, stood firm against the tide. Their bolters roared, each explosive shell finding its mark in the alien flesh. Yet for every Tyranid they cut down, a dozen more surged forward to take its place. The sheer, overwhelming number of the Tyranid swarm was a weapon in itself. The fighting was fiercest at Cold Steel Ridge, where Marneus Calgar himself led the defense. It was here that he faced the Swarm Lord, a unique and terrifying creature that was the pinnacle of the Hive Mind's bio-artistry. Wielding 4 crackling bone sabers, the Swarm Lord was a being of ancient cunning and martial prowess. It directed the Tyranid swarms with a terrifying intelligence. Countering every tactic Calgar employed, the 2 legendary warriors clashed in a duel that would become the stuff of legend. Calgar, a giant in his Terminator armor, fought with all the skill and fury of a chapter master of the Ultramarines, but the Swarm Lord was his equal, its 4 blades a blur of deadly motion. Calgar was gravely wounded, his body broken by the Swarm Lord's relentless assault. Only the heroic sacrifice of his honor guard, who threw themselves at the monstrous creature, allowed Calgar to be carried from the field. The commander of the honor guard, Aloysius, was slain by the Swarm Lord, a noble life given to save his master. With Calgar out of the fight, the Tyranids pressed their advantage. The Swarm Lord turned its attention to the planet's polar fortresses, the last bastions of Imperial defense. Here, the Ultramarines' esteemed First Company, led by the valiant Captain Sol Invictus, made their last stand. They fought to the last man, their names forever enshrined in the annals of the Imperium. But even their legendary skill and unwavering courage could not hold back the endless tide. The entire First Company was annihilated, a loss that would cripple the Ultramarines for decades to come. As the ground battle raged, the space war took a decisive turn. Calgar, though grievously injured, took command of the surviving Imperial fleet. He coordinated a series of daring raids on the Tyranid vessels as they spread out to encircle the planet. However, the Hive Mind had a plan of its own. Having delivered their cargo of spores, the Tyranid bio-vessels broke from orbit, seemingly in retreat. Their goal was to lure Calgar's fleet away from Macragge to a final, decisive confrontation. Calgar pursued the retreating fleet to the ringed world of Circe. At the edge of the Macragge system, it was a trap. A second Tyranid fleet, concealed amongst the planet's rings, sprang from hiding. The Imperial fleet was caught in a pincer, surrounded and outnumbered, all seemed lost. But at that darkest moment, salvation arrived. A massive force of over 200 warships from the Tempestus fleet dropped out of the warp, catching the Tyranids in a trap of their own. The ensuing battle was a desperate, chaotic affair. The combined might of the Imperial fleets, though still outnumbered, fought with the fury of the doomed. The battle barge of the Ultramarines, the 40 Octomarines, the 40 Octavia Source, led the charge, its weapons blazing. It was the sheer, stubborn refusal of the Imperial forces to yield that won the day. The Tyranid fleet, having sustained immense losses, was shattered. The threat of Hive Fleet Behemoth, as a cohesive entity, was finally ended. The cost of victory, however, was staggering. The Ultramarines were decimated, their first company completely destroyed. Macragay, though saved, was scarred by the conflict. It would take years to scour the last of the Tyranid creatures from its surface, and though Behemoth was defeated, its legacy would endure. The Hive fleet had splintered, its smaller fragments scattering in all directions. Each of these splinters, given time and fresh biomass, had the potential to grow into a new and terrible threat. The Imperium had won the battle for Macragge, but the First Tyrannic War was a brutal awakening. It was the first time they had faced the Great Devourer, but it would not be the last. The Hive Mind had learned much from its defeat, and it would return, stronger and more cunning than before. The skies of Macragge, once a familiar and comforting blanket of blue, had become a canvas of impending doom. Forewarned by the grim tidings of Inquisitor Cryptman, Chapter Master Marnius Calgar had transformed the Jewel of Ultramar into a fortress world of unparalleled strength. Orbiting the planet was a vast armada, a testament to the might of the Ultramarines and the wider domain they protected. Mighty battle barges, ancient and storied vessels, stood shoulder to shoulder with swift strike cruisers and the heavy cruisers of the Ultramar defense fleet. Even humble merchantmen and privateer vessels had been requisitioned, their hulls now bristling with weapons, ready to sell their lives dearly. Star Nova class orbital weapon stations, colossal platforms of destruction, hung like vengeful stars in the void, their weapon ports aglow with latent power. On the world below, the preparations were no less thorough. The already formidable defenses were bolstered, bunkers were deepened, fortifications reinforced, and ground-to-air turret emplacements multiplied until they studded the landscape like metallic thorns. Ancient titans, slumbering giants of war from the Legio Praetor, were awakened. Their colossal forms strode across the icy plains, their very presence a promise of the devastation to come. Calgar's strategy was one of layered defense. The fleet would be the first line, the anvil upon which the Tyranid wave would break. Should it fail, the ground forces would fall back to the planet's two polar fortresses, mighty bastions of adamantium and rockcrete, to hold out until reinforcements could arrive from the wider Imperium. Macragge was ready. Then they came. Hive Fleet Behemoth did not arrive with a thunderous roar or a grand declaration. It simply appeared, a great and silent shadow blotting out the stars. It was a living fleet, a swarm of bio-vessels that pulsed with a malevolent unified purpose. The sheer scale of it was beyond comprehension, a tide of chitin and flesh that stretched across the void. The Imperial fleet, for all its might, seemed like a small collection of islands against a world-drowning tsunami. The space battle was a maelstrom of unimaginable violence. Imperial warships, vessels that had weathered centuries of conflict, were torn asunder by living torpedoes and corrosive bioplasma. The defenders fought with the cold fury of the Adeptus Astartes, their targeting systems locking onto the grotesque bioships, blowing them apart in silent, blossoming explosions of vaporized ichor and shattered bone. For every Tyranid vessel destroyed, however, a dozen more swarmed forward to take its place. The Star Nova stations unleashed torrents of lance fire, beams of pure energy that speared through the Tyranid fleet, but the swarm was endless. Despite the valiant defense, the Tyranids began to break through. Mycetic spores, fleshy drop pods, carrying hordes of warrior organisms, rained down upon Macragge. They descended through the atmosphere like a storm of falling flesh, each one a harbinger of the planet's violation. The skies darkened with their sheer numbers, and the ground shuddered as they impacted, disgorging their lethal cargo. The ground war had begun. Kalga, ever the master strategist, divided his forces, the primary and secondary task forces, composed of the elite First Company veterans and the steadfast Ultramar planetary defense forces, were sent to garrison the northern and southern polar fortresses. These fortresses were the linchpins of the entire defense, their powerful defense lasers the only thing keeping the bioships in high orbit from overwhelming the planet completely. Kalga himself took command of the largest force, a mobile army built around the entire Second Company, with elements of the 1st, 5th, and 10th. His task was to fight a bloody rearguard action, to slow the Tyranid advance and buy precious time for the polar garrisons to solidify their positions. At first, the Ultramarines' disciplined firepower and tactical brilliance held the tide at bay. They met the chittering hordes with controlled bursts of bolter fire and the roar of chainswords. The ground trembled under the tread of dreadnoughts and the explosive impacts of artillery. But the Tyranids were a force of nature, a relentless flood of claws and teeth that cared nothing for losses. For every creature cut down, 3 more scrambled over its corpse. Driven by the singular will of the Hive Mind, even under Kalga's masterful leadership, the Imperial forces were only delaying the inevitable. The blue-armored warriors were a thin line holding back an ocean of alien hunger. The weight of numbers began to tell. Kalga was forced to make the agonizing decision to withdraw his forces further north, ceding ground to the inexorable advance. The retreat was made more perilous when Genestealer vanguard organisms, a terrifyingly effective infiltration strain, burst from the sewers beneath the Sirocco starport. They slaughtered the defenders and pilots, crippling a vital part of the planet's aerial support and devastating the ranks of the auxiliary forces. With his auxiliary forces decimated and the need to slow the Tyranid onslaught more desperate than ever, Kalga chose his ground for a final desperate stand, Cold Steel Ridge. It was a vast industrial complex on the frozen northern sea, a place of gantries and smokestacks that would now become a fortress. The defenders were a company of defense auxilia, their courage bolstered by the presence of a mighty Banblade super-heavy tank, the fin pride of Herine. It was here that the Hive Mind revealed its own chilling intelligence. It had identified Marnius Kalga as the single greatest threat to its conquest of Macragge, and to eliminate him, it dispatched its deadliest servant, a creature of nightmare that would become a legend of terror in the annals of the Imperium, the Swarm Lord. The arrival of this unique bioform was a turning point. The defenders had begun to understand the frenzied, almost mindless assaults of the lesser Tyranids, but the Swarm Lord infused the Horde with a terrifying, cunning strategy. The battle for Cold Steel Ridge was a symphony of calculated horror. The Tyranid assault began with tunneling ravenous bursting from the frozen ground to strike at the defenders' left flank, a clever diversion. As the Ultramarines moved to counter this threat, the Swarm Lord unleashed its true attack, a wave of monstrous carnifexes, living battering rams of muscle and chitin, charged the fawn pride of Hera. The mighty Bannerblade was torn apart, its thick armor peeled back like fruit rind. From his command post, Kalga watched in grim understanding as the enemy's tactics unfolded. Gargoyles and harpies swooped from the sky, their shrieks a death knell as they preyed specifically on the officers and sergeants of the auxiliary units. Sowing chaos and confusion, Biovores launched spore mines that rained down on the defenders, forcing them to spread out to minimize casualties, which in turn left them vulnerable to the sudden, earth-shattering eruption of Morlocks and Triggons from below. The Ultramarines fought with a valor that would be sung of for millennia. They reacted to each new threat with disciplined fire and unwavering courage, bolstering weakened sections of the line and selling every inch of ground for a river of alien blood. But they were outnumbered, and now they were being outthought. The Swarm Lord adapted to Kalga's tactics as quickly as he could devise them. Then the creature itself made its move. flanked by a bodyguard of hulking Tyrant Guard and Tyranid warriors. The Swarmlord bellowed a psychic challenge that tore at the minds of the defenders. It ignored the swirling melee around it, its four bone sabers weaving a deadly dance as it charged directly towards Marnius Calga's position. The chapter master of the Ultramarines met the charge without hesitation, the gauntlets of Ultramar blazing. The duel that followed was a clash of titans. Calga, a giant among men and a warrior with centuries of experience, fought with every ounce of his skill and strength. But the Swarmlord was his equal, a being created for the sole purpose of perfect strategic slaughter. The creature's blades were a blur, deflecting and striking with impossible speed. Calga was gravely wounded, his artificer armor rent and torn, his body broken by the Swarmlord's relentless assault. As the Lord of Macragge fell, his honor guard finally broke through the wall of lesser Tyranids to intervene. They threw themselves at the Swarmlord, their power axes and thunderhammers crashing against its armored hide. It was a desperate, heroic sacrifice. The commander of the guard, Aloysius, held back the monster and its bodyguard for a few precious moments, as the rest of the honor guard dragged their wounded chapter master to safety. Just as Aloysius fell to the Swarmlord's blades, the roar of engines filled the air. Thunderhawk gunships descended from the orbital battle barge, Sativiusis, their heavy bolters and las cannons blasting a path through the Tyranid horde. The survivors were evacuated under heavy fire, leaving Cold Steel Ridge in the hands of the Great Devourer. The path to the northern polar fortress now lay open, the fate of Macragge hung by the most slender of threads. There is a silence that follows the Great Devourer, a quiet unlike any other in the galaxy. It is not the quiet of a peaceful forest, nor the hushed reverence of a grand cathedral. It is a hollow, profound emptiness, the sound of a world that has had its very soul scoured away. To travel the path of a hive fleet is to witness a graveyard of stars, a string of pearls made of bone white, barren rock. Each was once a world, teeming with life, with stories, with hope. Now they are merely echoes. Our journey takes us first to the remnants of a world once known as Sotha, a planet that stood proudly until the shadow of Hive Fleet Kraken fell upon it. From orbit, Sotha is a marble of dull, grey stone, featureless and cold. There are no oceans to catch the light of its distant sun, no clouds to cast soft shadows on the ground below. The Tyranids did not just take the life upon the world, they took the world itself. The seas were siphoned into the void, drawn up by colossal feeder tendrils that latched onto the planet like a parasite. The atmosphere, too, was inhaled by the hungry bioships, leaving behind a vacuum. Walking upon the surface of Sotha is an exercise in profound loneliness. The ground is a uniform carpet of fine, grey dust, the final, pulverized remains of mountains, cities, and civilizations. Here and there, strange geological formations jut from the landscape, twisted and unnatural. These are the desiccated husks of capillary towers, the colossal straws through which the planet's lifeblood was drained. They stand like skeletal fingers pointing accusingly at the silent stars, their fleshy, organic components long since withered and turned to stone. At their bases, you can still see the vast, circular depressions of the reclamation pools. Once, these were bubbling cauldrons of digestive acid, where every living thing, plant, animal, and even the Tyranid warriors themselves, was rendered down into a nutrient slurry. Now, they are just glassy craters, their surfaces fused into obsidian by the sheer biochemical intensity of the process. There are no ruins in the conventional sense, no proud, defiant skeletons of buildings. The Tyranid consumption is too efficient for that. Structures of metal and plastic were not simply destroyed, they were broken down, their minerals and compounds absorbed by specialized organisms. A city that once housed millions is now just a slightly different shade of grey dust, a faint, metallic tang in the sterile soil. Yet, if you look closely, sometimes you can find a trace, a ghost of what was, a pattern in the dust that suggests a street grid, a strange, smooth depression that might have been a plaza. These are the only headstones for 1 billion souls. We move onward, to a world that has no name, one of many consumed by the relentless advance of Hive Fleet Leviathan. This planet was once a jungle world, a vibrant green jewel. Now, its surface is a cracked ochre desert. The process here was subtly different. The hive mind adapts, and its methods of consumption evolve. Here, it did not just drink the oceans, it boiled them away. The heat generated by the invasion, by the sheer biological friction of trillions of organisms, turned the seas to steam, which was then more easily absorbed by the orbiting fleet. The ground is littered with the fossilized remains of the world's once mighty forests. The trees were not felled, they were dissolved where they stood by corrosive spores. What remains are petrified pillars of silica, ghost trees that crumble to dust at the slightest touch. As you walk through these silent spectral forests, you feel a faint, persistent vibration under your feet. The planet's crust is not settled. Specialized Tyranid bioforms, like the monstrous Trigons and Morlocks, burrowed deep into the earth, not just to attack, but to seed the very planetary mantle with bioacidic agents. They fractured the bedrock, releasing geothermal energy and valuable minerals that the Hive Fleet craved. The world is now geologically unstable, its core slowly cooling, its final death rattle echoing through millennia. And then there is the psychic echo. The shadow in the warp is the most well-known psychic phenomenon associated with the Tyranids, a suffocating blanket of dread that smothers the minds of their prey. But what is left behind is different. It is not an active presence, but a scar, a psychic stain left upon the fabric of reality. On this dead jungle world, the silence is not entirely empty. If you quiet your mind and simply exist in the oppressive stillness, you can feel it. A faint, lingering whisper of absolute terror. It is the collective psychic scream of every creature that died here. A memory of fear so profound that it has been permanently etched into the emptiness. It is a cold, sharp feeling, like a needle of ice in the soul. There is no image, no coherent thought, only the pure, undiluted emotion of a world's final, agonizing moments. Our final destination is the very first to fall, the world that gave the Great Devourer its name. Tyran. Here, the aftermath feels ancient. The planet is utterly sterile, a perfect sphere of bedrock scoured clean by the first, hungriest tendril of Hive Fleet behemoth. More than any other world, Tyran feels complete in its emptiness. The capillary towers have eroded to nothing, leaving only faint, circular stains on the plains. The dust here is finer, softer, the result of countless centuries of micrometeorite impacts on an unprotected surface. There is a unique feature on Tyran, however, something not seen on other consumed worlds. In the deepest chasms, shielded from the raw void, are vast, crystalline structures. They glow with a faint, internal luminescence, a cold blue light. These are thought to be byproducts of the Tyranid consumption process, minerals and silicates from the planet's crust that were excreted by the feeder organisms, recrystallized under immense pressure and alien biology. They are strangely beautiful, these silent glowing monuments to a forgotten apocalypse. They are tombs and gravestones, all in one. Standing on a ridge overlooking a valley of these silent, glowing crystals, one can finally understand the true nature of the Tyranid threat. It is not one of conquest, for they leave no territory to rule. It is not one of malice, for there is no hatred in its hunger, only a chilling, biological imperative. It is the threat of absolute reduction. The Tyranids reduce everything life, culture, history, geology, chemistry back to its simplest component, biomass. A resource to be expended. They are the great universal recyclers, the final, logical endpoint of evolution in a cold and unforgiving cosmos. The stars above Tyran are sharp and clear, unfiltered by any atmosphere. They do not twinkle. They are hard, steady points of light in an infinite blackness. They offer no comfort, no sense of wonder. They are merely the next set of feeding grounds. From this barren rock, this monument to a silent, all-consuming hunger, the galaxy looks like a banquet, waiting to be served. And in the oppressive, perfect silence, you can almost hear the faint, distant echo of a single, unifying thought. A thought that travels across the void from one hive fleet to the next, consume and move on. There is nothing else. In the silent, chilling expanse between worlds, the hive mind does not think as a man thinks. It does not reason with logic, nor feel with a heart. It is a consciousness woven from the psychic screams of trillions upon trillions of beings, a gestalt entity vast beyond mortal comprehension. Yet, for this galaxy-spanning intellect to enact its singular, ravenous will, it requires a nervous system, a method to translate pure, psychic imperative into physical action on a planetary scale. This is the purpose of the synaptic web, a network of command and control that is both beautifully complex and terrifyingly efficient. It is a command structure with no commanders, a hierarchy with no leaders, only conduits for a will that is absolute. Imagine a world teeming with life, its inhabitants unaware of the shadow falling upon them. On the surface, the initial stages of a Tyranid invasion appear chaotic. Swarms of lesser creatures, the clawed, skittering hormagaunts, and the biogun-wielding termagants, pour across the landscape like a tide of chitin and fury. To the terrified defenders, it is a mindless instinct-driven rampage. But it is not. Every movement, every flanking maneuver, every coordinated assault is guided. This guidance flows not from a general on a hill, but through the very air, an invisible psychic current that connects every creature to the greater whole. The sources of this current are the synapse creatures. These are the larger, more sophisticated Tyranid bioforms, organisms engineered not just for slaughter, but to act as living psychic relays. Think of them as signal amplifiers, boosting the whisper of the hive mind into a deafening roar that smaller beasts cannot ignore. The towering hive tyrant, a monster of nightmare proportions, is a primary node in this network. Its massive cranial structure houses a complex brain that acts as a powerful conduit, focusing the hive mind's will and directing the swarms around it with pinpoint precision. Its commands are not spoken, they are pulses of pure intent, impressions of hunger, of movement, of the overwhelming need to kill. Beneath the hive tyrant in this silent hierarchy are the Tyranid warriors. They are the sergeants of the swarm, striding through the chaos of battle, their larger, more developed minds acting as secondary nodes. They extend the reach of the synaptic web, ensuring that even the furthest flanks of the swarm are connected to the central consciousness. A group of termagants might be suppressed by enemy fire, their base instincts screaming for self-preservation. But the moment a Tyranid warrior moves within range, that instinct is overridden, the fear is washed away, replaced by the unyielding directive of the hive mind, and they will surge forward into the guns, heedless of their own destruction. This web is not a simple broadcast, like a radio signal. It is a dynamic, multi-layered network, specialized creatures like the zoanthropes, with their grotesquely swollen heads, act as psychic artillery and powerful synaptic relays. Their mental energies so potent they can shield nearby creatures or blast foes apart. The tervigan, a living incubator that spawns termagants from its own body, is also a mobile synapse hub, guiding its newborn progeny the moment they crawl, slick and steaming, into the world. Even stranger bioforms, like the insidious neurotyrant or the skulking neurolictor, are woven into this command structure, each amplifying and directing the hive mind's psychic energies in their own unique, horrifying way. To understand the swarm's coordination, one might look to the social insects of ancient Earth. An ant colony, for instance, can function as a superorganism, its millions of individual members working in near-perfect harmony. Ants communicate not through sound, but through chemical signals called pheromones. A forager that finds a source of food will lay down a chemical trail on its journey back to the nest. Other ants detect this trail with their antennae, a silent scented language that says, "This way to sustenance." The more ants that follow the trail, the stronger the scent becomes, reinforcing the path for others in a simple, elegant feedback loop. The Tyranid swarm operates on a similar principle, but on a psychic plane. The imperatives of the hive mind, channeled through the synapse creatures, are like an irresistible pheromone trail for the mind, guiding the lesser beasts along paths of strategic importance. Or consider the honeybee. When a bee swarm needs to find a new home, scout bees venture out to find suitable locations. Upon returning, they perform a complex waggle dance, a series of movements that communicates the direction and distance to the potential nest site. Other scouts observe this dance, fly out to inspect the location, and if they agree on its quality, return to perform the same dance, recruiting more bees to the consensus. It is a decentralized process of decision-making, where the collective agrees on the best course of action through distributed intelligence. The synaptic web is a dark mirror of this, a form of collective action where dissent is impossible. The lesser creatures do not offer opinions or reach a consensus. They simply obey the overwhelming psychic signal. The true terror of this system is revealed when a connection is broken. If a Tyranid warrior is slain, or a Hormagaunt pack outruns the range of a nearby hive tyrant, the psychic link is severed. The results are immediate and dramatic. The lesser creatures, suddenly bereft of the hive mind's guidance, revert to their base, animalistic instincts. Their coordinated movements dissolve into chaos. Some may freeze, confused. Others might continue to attack the nearest enemy with blind fury, but without any tactical cohesion. Some may even turn on each other in their confusion, or simply burrow into the ground to hide, their only instinct now being survival. To the Imperium's soldiers, it is a moment of respite, a sign that the tide might be turning, but it is a fleeting victory. The moment another synapse creature moves into range, the disconnected gaunts are instantly reassimilated into the web. Their brief, feral fugue, forgotten as the will of the hive mind, once again becomes their own. This web of control is not merely a tool for battlefield command. It is the very essence of the Tyranid race. Each individual creature is but a single cell in a galactic scale organism. The synaptic web is the nervous system that binds these cells together, ensuring every claw, every fang, and every bioweapon is working towards the same singular goal: to consume, deep within the colossal hive ships, creatures of unimaginable size and power. The Norn Queens act as the ultimate source of this consciousness, the biological factories and psychic anchors of the entire fleet. They are the origin point from which the synaptic threads are first spun, the massive minds that amplify the hive mind's desires into the psychic flood that directs the swarms. Their connection is the most powerful, their will the most direct translation of the hive mind's hunger. And so the web spreads, with every new world consumed, with every new strand of genetic material absorbed. The hive mind learns, adapts, and refines its methods. The synaptic web becomes stronger, more efficient. New synapse creatures are birthed, each a more perfect conduit for the all-consuming will that drives them. It is a system of command without individuality, of strategy without thought, of perfect, terrifying unity. It is the silent psychic scream that echoes across the stars, the invisible network that will, if left unchecked, bind the entire galaxy in its suffocating embrace. The void between galaxies is a silence unlike any other. It is a cold, deep, and profound emptiness, stretching for millions of light years. Within this vast expanse, the faint glow of distant galaxies is the only testament to a universe teeming with light and life. Yet, for the Tyranid race, this void was not an obstacle. It was a passage, a long dark road that led them to our own Milky Way. But what could have possibly driven them across such an impossible distance? What force could compel an entire species to undertake a journey of such magnitude? These are the questions that linger, the whispers in the dark that keep even the most learned scholars of the Imperium awake at night. The prevailing theory, the one that offers a sliver of comfort in its comprehensibility, is that the Tyranids have already consumed their own home galaxy. It is a chilling thought, but one that fits the relentless, all-consuming nature of the Great Devourer. Imagine, if you will, a galaxy much like our own, teeming with countless stars and worlds. Imagine the civilizations that may have risen and fallen, the empires that stretched across spiral arms, the myriad forms of life that called it home. Now imagine it all gone, silenced. Every planet stripped bare, every sun dimmed, every last trace of biological and technological achievement absorbed into the great and terrible hunger of the hive mind. This image of a silent galaxy is a recurring nightmare for those who study the Tyranids. A galaxy picked clean, leaving nothing but dust and echoes. The Tyranids, having exhausted every resource, every living thing, would have had no choice but to look outward, to cast their ravenous gaze across the intergalactic void, seeking new feeding grounds. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, would have appeared as a tantalizing oasis in the vast desert of space, a beacon of life shining brightly against the profound darkness. Yet there are other, more unsettling possibilities. Whispers among the Eldar, those ancient and far-sighted seers, speak of a terror that even the Tyranids might flee. They speak of a force, a presence, an entity of such immense power and malevolence that the all-consuming hive mind would choose to abandon its own galaxy rather than face it. The Eldar have no name for this theoretical entity, for to name it would be to give it form, to acknowledge its reality in a way that could invite its attention. They refer to it only as the Great Silence, or the Eater of Gods. This concept is almost too vast for the human mind to grasp. The Tyranids, a force that has brought the mighty imperium of man to its knees, a swarm that darkens the stars and consumes entire sectors, running in fear. It suggests a cosmic hierarchy of predators, a food chain that extends into the darkest corners of existence, with beings that could make a hive fleet seem as insignificant as a single insect. What could such a being be? A sentient galaxy? A being of pure, malevolent energy born in the aether? Or perhaps the collective psychic consciousness of a race that achieved a dark and terrible apotheosis? The possibilities are as endless as they are terrifying. The Silent King, Sarek, the last ruler of the Necron dynasties, may hold a piece of this puzzle. During his long, self-imposed exile in the void between galaxies, it is said that he encountered the Tyranids. He saw the Great Devourer in its nascent, intergalactic stage. More than that, he saw the direction of their inexorable advance. He saw the path of their hunger, a path that led directly to the Milky Way. But what has never been fully understood is what he witnessed that prompted him to return to his slumbering people. Was it merely the threat of the Tyranids themselves, a force he knew the fractured and sleeping Necron Empire could not repel? Or did he see something else? Did he catch a glimpse of what the Tyranids were running from? His chronicles, though fragmented and cryptic, speak of a shadow in the void, a great and terrible emptiness that seemed to follow in the Tyranids' wake. He described the hive mind not as a hunter, but as a refugee, a desperate, starving refugee, fleeing a cataclysm of unimaginable proportions. This single, terrifying account from a being who has lived for millions of years, who has seen the birth and death of stars, lends a chilling credence to the theory of a greater, unseen threat. A threat that could one day follow the Tyranids to our own galactic shores. The mystery of the Tyranids' origin is further deepened by their own biology. The sheer diversity of their bioforms is staggering. They adapt, they evolve, they incorporate the genetic material of their victims with terrifying efficiency. But this constant state of flux, this endless parade of new and more horrifying creatures, raises a fundamental question. What did the original Tyranids look like? What was the proto-Tyranid, the first organism to be absorbed into the nascent hive mind? Was it a single powerful creature, a swarm of smaller organisms, or something else entirely, something utterly alien to our understanding of life? Some imperial xenobiologists have dedicated their lives to this question, sifting through the genetic codes of captured Tyranid organisms, searching for a common ancestor, a species zero from which all others have sprung. But the Tyranid genome is a labyrinth, a constantly shifting mosaic of stolen and repurposed DNA. Finding a single, original strand is like trying to find a single grain of sand in a raging storm. It is a task that may be impossible, The answer forever lost in a billion years of ravenous consumption and relentless evolution. And what of the hive mind itself? The psychic consciousness that binds every Tyranid creature into a single, cohesive whole. What is the nature of its intelligence? Is it a true, singular consciousness, a godlike entity born from the collective will of its countless bodies? Or is it something more akin to a natural phenomenon, a force of nature like gravity or electromagnetism, but on a psychic, biological level? The sheer scale of its intellect is undeniable. It coordinates the movements of trillions of organisms across vast interstellar distances. It learns from its defeats. It devises new and cunning strategies. It is an intelligence that has outmaneuvered some of the greatest military minds in the galaxy. Yet, for all its power, for all its terrifying, cold, and calculating intelligence, the hive mind has never communicated. It has never shown any desire to do so. It does not issue demands. It does not offer terms of surrender. It simply consumes. This utter lack of any recognizable form of communication is, perhaps, one of the most unsettling things about the Tyranids. It speaks to an alienness, a fundamental otherness that is truly profound. It suggests that their motives, their desires, their very existence are so far removed from our own that there can be no common ground, no possibility of understanding or coexistence. There can only be the eater and the eaten. The event known as the Pharos incident adds another layer of intrigue to this cosmic mystery. The Pharos was a mysterious Necron device, a beacon that shone with a powerful psychic light. During the dark days of the Horus Heresy, this beacon was overloaded in a desperate act, sending a massive pulse of psychic energy across the void. It is now widely believed that this psychic pulse was what first attracted the attention of the Tyranid hive mind, drawing it towards our galaxy like a moth to a flame. But this raises a chilling question. If the Tyranids were already in the void, already fleeing some unspeakable horror, what did that pulse of light truly signify to them? Did they see it as a sign of a new feeding ground, a new sanctuary? Or did they see it as a beacon of another kind, a sign that there were other intelligent, psychic races in the universe, races that might be able to help them, to stand with them against the great and terrible darkness that pursued them? This is a thought that few in the Imperium dare to entertain. The idea that the Tyranids might not be a simple, mindless predator, but a desperate, fleeing race, seeking allies in a hostile universe. It is a thought that is quickly dismissed as heresy, as a dangerous and foolish sentimentality. But the question remains, what if the Great Devourer is not just a force of nature, but a force with a history, a purpose beyond simple consumption? What if it is a force that knows fear? And so we are left with these unanswered questions, these whispers in the dark that speak of a universe far more vast and terrifying than we can possibly imagine. We are left with the image of the Tyranid swarm, a relentless tide of tooth and claw, pouring into our galaxy from the cold and silent void. But now we must ask ourselves, are they the storm, or are they merely the first raindrops of a much larger, much more terrifying tempest? Are they the ultimate predator, or are they simply the first wave of refugees from a war that has already been lost? A war that has consumed entire galaxies, a war that we, in our ignorance, have not even begun to comprehend. The silence between galaxies holds its secrets close, but the arrival of the Tyranids may be the first terrifying whisper of a truth we are not yet ready to face, the truth of what lies beyond the Milky Way, and the true, terrifying scale of the cosmic horrors that await us in the unending, silent dark. The Great Devourer, once a phantom whispered on the edge of the galaxy, was now a roaring bonfire consuming civilization after civilization. Tendrils of Hive Fleet, Leviathan, unimaginably vast, plunged into the galactic core from above and below the galactic plane. A pincer movement on a scale that defied comprehension. The psychic scream of its approach, the shadow in the warp, was a suffocating blanket of dread that snuffed out the light of the Astronomicon and drove psychers to madness. Planets fell silent, one by one, their last desperate messages arriving as ghostly echoes years after they had been turned to barren rock and digested biomass. The sheer, absolute finality of the Tyranid threat began to dawn on a galaxy that had known only perpetual war amongst its own children. This was not a crusade for territory, not a quest for plunder or souls. It was extinction, pure and simple, an ecological disaster of cosmic proportions. For the first time, the disparate and warring factions of the galaxy were forced to look beyond their ancient hatreds, not in a grand gesture of newfound understanding, but with the cold, pragmatic fear of a drowning man grasping for any hand offered on the dusty, war-torn world of Gehenna. One of the most unthinkable alliances was forged in the crucible of desperation. Commander Dante of the Blood Angels, his face a mask of weary nobility, had been locked in a bitter struggle with the legions of the Silent King, Zarek, the ruler of all Necrons. For weeks, the tactical genius of the ancient space marine was matched against the temporal manipulations of the Necron overlord. Just as the conflict reached its zenith, the sky turned dark. A splinter fleet of Tyranids descended, drawn to the carnage like cosmic vultures. In that moment, faced with an enemy that sought only to consume them both, the war between marine and machine paused. Zarek, who had journeyed in the void between galaxies, had witnessed the Tyranids' true nature and recognized them as the galaxy's most dire threat. He had returned from his self-imposed exile with a single, overarching goal: to unite his slumbering race against the Great Devourer. Through a herald, the Silent King offered a truce. Dante, staring into the abyss of total annihilation, accepted. The alliance was tense, a fragile thing born of necessity. The Blood Angels, filled with righteous fire, secretly brought a cyclonic warhead to their parley, ready to obliterate the Necron King should the moment arise. The Necrons, in their cold calculus, saw the Space Marines as little more than useful cannon fodder, placing them in the thickest fighting to preserve their own immortal legions. Yet they fought as one. Golden armored heroes stood, shoulder to shoulder with silent skeletal machines. Bolt of fire mingled with the eerie green crackle of Gauss flares, mowing down waves of chittering horrors. The Alliance ultimately defeated the Tyranid splinter fleet, and with the immediate threat gone, the two forces parted ways, too exhausted and wary to resume their own war. This strange truce was not an isolated incident. Across the Cryptus system, on the very doorstep of the Blood Angels' homeworld of Baal, another pact was made. Anrakir the Traveller, a Necron lord of great renown, was awakening the legions of the Mefrit dynasty when the shadow of Hive Fleet, Leviathan, fell upon them. Seeing the nascent Necron forces in peril, Anrakir reached out to the nearest power, Commander Dante and his beleaguered Blood Angels. Together, they hatched a desperate plan to activate an ancient Necronter superweapon, the Magnavitrium, to turn a gas giant into a star and scourge the Tyranids from the system, while Flesh Terrors and Sisters of Battle made their final, bloody stands on besieged worlds. The Death Company of the Blood Angels fought alongside Necron phalanxes to secure the weapon's firing mechanism. They succeeded, but the cost was immense. The worlds were saved, but countless Imperial lives were lost in the cataclysmic activation. The Necrons, however, simply phased out, unharmed, their objective complete. They had bought the Imperium time, nothing more. Elsewhere, other races faced their own reckonings. The Tarto Empire, usually reliant on diplomacy and long-range firepower, found itself in a grinding war of attrition against Hive Fleet Gorgon. This particular Hive Fleet was terrifyingly adaptive, evolving new creatures with near immunity to the T-Tor's advanced pulse weaponry after only a few encounters. The rational, strategic minds of the Tor were baffled by an enemy that could not be reasoned with, an enemy for whom the concept of the greater good was utterly alien. Desperate, the Tor found themselves in the strange position of fighting alongside Imperial Guard forces, their combined and disparate tactics proving just enough to confuse the Hive Mind's rapid adaptations and shatter the fleet. The Orcs, however, saw the Tyranids not as an existential threat, but as the greatest fight they had ever known. In the Octarius sector, the ambitious Inquisitor Cryptman, in a move of stunning hubris, lured Hive Fleet, Leviathan, directly into the heart of the vast Orc empire of Octarius. His logic was that the two ravenous hordes would annihilate one another. The result was a catastrophic miscalculation. The conflict did not burn out. It became a self-perpetuating furnace of war. Orcs from across the galaxy flocked to Octarius, drawn by the promise of endless battle, growing bigger and stronger with every fight. The Tyranids, in turn, feasted on an unending supply of orc biomass, constantly learning from their brutish, cunning foes and evolving ever deadlier bioweapons. The Octarius War became an engine of evolution for both species, making the Imperium's two most dangerous enemies stronger than ever before. Even the enigmatic Elder were forced to confront this silent, psychic tide. Their farseers, who could read the tangled skeins of fate, found their visions clouded and choked by the shadow and the warp. For them, the Hive Mind was a psychic presence of such magnitude, it rivaled their ancient nemesis, Slaanesh. They saw the Tyranids not as a simple race of monsters, but as a force of pure primal consumption. The great dragon, whose soul shone brighter and more terribly than any star, whispers among the harlequins, suggested the Tyranids were a consequence, a reaction of the galaxy itself to some ancient transgression, an extermination protocol set in motion. The Elder fought them where they could, their graceful warriors and phantom machines striking like ghosts from the webway. But even they knew that this was a war they could not win through simple battle. A galaxy that had been defined by its internal conflicts was now united by a single terrifying truth. It was being eaten alive. The alliances were fleeting, born of convenience and terror, and they would shatter the moment the immediate threat subsided. But for a brief, desperate time, Necron and Human, Tor and Imperial, all faced the same direction. They stared into the endless, hungry void from which the Tyranids came, and they understood that their own wars were a luxury they could no longer afford. The galaxy was united in fear, but it was also being consumed, piece by bloody piece, by the silent, patient hunger of the Hive Mind. The galaxy does not scream, it dies in whispers, long before the first chitinous claw scrapes against a void shield, or the first bioplasma volley melts through the hull of a proud Imperial vessel. The silence descends. It is not the quiet of peace, nor the stillness of an empty void. It is a heavy, oppressive silence, a chilling emptiness where once there was a chorus of souls. This is the first sign. This is the shadow in the warp. Imagine, if you will, the countless worlds of the Imperium, each a candle flame in the dark. Each world is connected to its neighbors by the fragile threads of astropathic communication, whispers of thought and feeling that traverse the madness of the warp. It is a lifeline, a comfort, a constant reassurance that no world is truly alone. Now, imagine those threads being cut, one by one. Imagine the vibrant tapestry of psychic communication dissolving into static, a choir of 1 trillion voices suddenly muted. The astropaths are the first to feel it. For them, the silence is a physical blow. Their minds, attuned to the currents of the Empyrean, are suddenly adrift in a dead sea, where once they heard the thoughts of their brethren across light years, they now hear only a formless, psychic scratching, a sound like billions of insects crawling just behind the veil of reality. For the most sensitive, the silence brings on fits of screaming, bleeding from the eyes, and a madness from which there is no recovery. For the common citizen, the effect is more subtle, but no less terrifying. It begins with a pervasive sense of unease. Sleep is no longer a refuge, but a gateway to shared collective nightmares. Billions of souls across a sector dream of being hunted by an unseen predator, of being consumed by a hunger that is as vast and as cold as space itself. They wake with a scream caught in their throats, the feeling of chitinous plates sliding against their skin, the phantom taste of their own flesh being devoured. Anxiety becomes a constant companion, hope a fading memory. This is the true terror of the Great Devourer. It does not just consume worlds, it consumes the very spirit of its prey long before it arrives, and then they appear. Out of the silent, starless void between galaxies they come. They are not detected by Auspex or sensor array, for their bioships emit no electromagnetic signatures. They are living organisms, vast and ancient. Their forms a horrifying fusion of crustacean and cephalopod, their hulls grown from hardened chitinous plates. These are the hive fleets, endless swarms of living vessels, each one a testament to the hive mind's singular, terrifying purpose. They move with a silent, inexorable purpose, a silent march across the cosmos that has continued for eons. The first to be given a name by the terrified Imperium was Behemoth. It did not employ cunning or strategy. It was a battering ram, a force of nature that smashed its way into the galaxy from the eastern fringe. It announced its arrival with the utter destruction of the Adeptus Mechanicus research station on the world of Tyran, a world that would give its name to this new existential threat. The defenders of Tyran fought valiantly, their disciplined last fire cutting down wave after wave of the strange, new bioforms that descended from the sky in fleshy mycetic spores. But for every creature they killed, 10 more took its place. The outpost was overrun, its defenders consumed, the very oceans of the world sucked dry until nothing remained but a barren, lifeless rock. Behemoth's relentless advance continued, a brutal, headlong charge into the heart of the Imperium. It devoured hundreds of systems, leaving a trail of dead worlds in its wake. Its path seemed random, a wild berserker rage that consumed everything before it. Finally, it reached the jewel of the eastern fringe, Ultramar, the home of the Ultramarines. The battle for Macragge was a conflict on a scale the Imperium had not seen in millennia. The legendary Space Marines fought with courage and discipline, but even they were pushed to the brink. The skies above Macragge were choked with Tyranid ships, and the ground was a living carpet of ravenous creatures. The first company of the Ultramarines, heroes of 1,000 campaigns, sacrificed themselves to the last man to defend the planet's polar fortresses. Though Behemoth was ultimately defeated, its back broken in a final, desperate battle in orbit, the cost was staggering. The Hive Mind had learned. It had tasted the defenders of the galaxy, and it was adapting. The second great hive fleet to assault the galaxy was named Kraken. It was a different beast entirely, where Behemoth was a blunt instrument of destruction. Kraken was a creature of cunning and subtlety. It did not attack in a single, massive wave, but in a series of smaller, coordinated fleets that struck across a vast front. Its true terror lay in its insidious methods of infiltration. Long before the main fleet arrived, Genestealer cults would rise up on unsuspecting worlds, their members having secretly worshipped the Tyranids for generations. These cults would sabotage defenses, spread terror and confusion, and prepare the way for their dark masters. The Eldar craft world of Iandan was one of the first to feel the full fury of Kraken. The elegant, graceful Eldar fought with all their skill and psychic might, but they were overwhelmed by the sheer, unending numbers of the Tyranid swarm. Though they ultimately repelled the invasion, Iandan was left a ghost of its former self. Its population decimated, its spirit stone shattered, and its future forever scarred. Kraken's splintered fleets would continue to plague the galaxy for years to come, a testament to the Tyranids' terrifying adaptability. But these first 2 invasions were merely heralds, the scouting parties for the true horror to come. From beneath the galactic plane, a new hive fleet emerged, so vast that it dwarfed both Behemoth and Kraken combined. This was Leviathan, the Great Devourer in its most terrifying form. Its strategy was one of absolute envelopment. It attacked on a front that spanned entire segmentums, its 2 main tendrils stretching the shadow in the warp over hundreds of light years, isolating vast swathes of the galaxy and cutting them off from any hope of reinforcement. Leviathan was the culmination of all the Hive Mind's accumulated knowledge. It possessed the brute force of Behemoth and the insidious cunning of Kraken, and it wielded them with terrifying precision. It learned from every battle, adapted to every new threat, and spawned ever more horrific bioforms to counter the defenses of the galaxy. Its advance was a slow, methodical consumption of everything in its path. The Imperium, reeling from countless other wars, struggled to mount a defense against this new, overwhelming threat. Worlds fell by the thousand. The Blood Angels, and their successor chapters made a desperate last stand at their homeworld of Baal. For weeks, they fought against a tide of trillions of Tyranid organisms, a battle so vast it scarred the very surface of their world. Though they claimed a Pyrrhic victory, with the unexpected intervention of the forces of chaos, the sons of Sanguinius were brought to the very edge of annihilation. Even the mighty orcs, a race that lives for the sheer joy of battle, found themselves locked in a war of attrition they could not win. In the Octaria sector, Hive Fleet Leviathan was deliberately lured into conflict with a massive orc empire by the radical Inquisitor Cryptman, in a desperate gamble to have the two Xenos threats destroy each other. For a time it seemed the plan might work. The orcs, reveling in the endless fight, met the Tyranids with unrestrained fury. The war escalated to an unbelievable scale, the biomass of fallen orcs feeding the Tyranid swarms, which in turn spurred the orcs to fight even harder, growing bigger and stronger with every battle. The Octarius War became a grinding, self-perpetuating conflict that threatened to spill out and consume the entire sector, and so the silent march continues. The Hive fleets are but the vanguard, the scouting tendrils of a much larger horror that waits in the void. They are the Great Devourer, an entity so vast and so alien that it defies comprehension. It does not hate, it does not feel malice, it is simply hungry, and the galaxy is its final meal. As you drift into the quiet darkness, let the slow, steady rhythm of this cosmic consumption be your guide. There is no struggle, there is no fear, there is only the gentle, inevitable silence of the end. The Great Devourer is coming, and all will be biomass, all will be one.